The crisp autumn air carried a hint of change as James Carter strode purposefully through the bustling streets of New York City. At 30, he was the epitome of ambition, his tailored suit an armor of success, his steely gaze fixed on a future glittering with promise. But today, that determined stride faltered as he approached the quaint cafe where Sophia waited, unaware that her world was about to shatter. Sophia sat at their usual table, her dark hair catching the late afternoon sun. Her fingers nervously toyed with the handle of her coffee cup, a smile brightening her face as she spotted James. But that smile faded as she caught the resolve in his eyes, a cold determination that sent a chill through her. "James," she began, her voice tinged with concern, "is everything okay?" He sat down, his movements stiff and calculated. "Sophia, we need to talk." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Sophia's heart raced, her mind frantically searching for a reason behind the distance in James's voice. "I've been offered a position," James continued, his tone businesslike. "It's an incredible opportunity, one that could set me on the path to becoming CEO within a few years." Sophia's eyes widened with excitement, but the lack of joy in James's expression quickly dampened her enthusiasm. "And that's wonderful news, isn't it?" she asked cautiously. James's jaw tightened. "It is. But it means I'll be relocating to the West Coast, permanently." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Sophia processed his words. "Oh," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, we can make it work. I can look for jobs out there. Or maybe—" "No, Sophia," James interrupted, his voice firm. "I'm going alone." The finality in his tone struck Sophia like a physical blow. She recoiled slightly, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. "What are you saying, James?" He leaned forward, his eyes cold and determined. "I'm saying that this is the end for us. My career has to come first. I can't be tied down, not when I'm so close to achieving everything I've worked for." Sophia's breath caught in her throat, tears welling in her eyes. "Tied down. Is that how you see our relationship? Our love?" James's expression hardened further. "Love is a distraction, Sophia. It's a weakness I can't afford right now. I need to be focused, driven. I can't let anything hold me back." The cafe around them faded into a blur as Sophia's world crumbled. The chatter of other patrons, the clinking of cups, all became a distant hum as she stared at the man she thought she knew. "James, please," she pleaded, reaching for his hand across the table. "We can work this out. Our love is strong enough to—" He pulled his hand away, cutting her off. "No, it's not. Nothing is stronger than my ambition, Sophia. I thought you understood that about me." Tears now flowed freely down Sophia's cheeks, her voice choked with emotion. "I thought I knew you, James. I thought what we had was special." For a brief moment, a flicker of doubt passed across James's face, a hint of the man Sophia had fallen in love with, but it was quickly replaced by the cold mask of determination. "It was special, Sophia, but it's over now. I need to move on, and so do you." He stood up abruptly, straightening his jacket. "I'm sorry it had to end this way. I hope you can understand that this is what's best for me." Sophia looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "Best for you? What about us, James? What about the future we planned together?" James's voice was devoid of emotion as he delivered his final blow. "There is no us anymore, Sophia. My future is my career. Goodbye." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sophia alone at the table, her world shattered into a million pieces. She watched his retreating back, unable to comprehend how the man she loved could abandon her so cruelly. As James pushed through the cafe door, he forced himself not to look back. He couldn't afford to see the pain he'd caused, couldn't risk the moment of weakness that might make him reconsider. His jaw set in determination as he merged into the flow of pedestrians on the sidewalk, each step taking him further from love and closer to the success he craved. Back in the cafe, Sophia sat motionless, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. The bustling life of the city continued around her, oblivious to the heart breaking within its midst. She placed a trembling hand on her stomach, a secret hope now turned to ashes. The child growing within her, a child James would never know, would be her sole comfort in the lonely days to come. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, two lives that had once been intertwined now diverged dramatically. James Carter, driven by ambition, set his course for a future of wealth and power, leaving behind the only person who had ever truly loved him. Sophia, left to pick up the pieces of her shattered dreams, faced an uncertain future as a single mother, carrying a piece of James with her that he had callously discarded. The abandonment was complete, a defining moment that would echo through the years, shaping destinies and setting in motion a chain of events that would one day bring these two souls crashing back into each other's orbits. But for now, as night fell over New York City, James and Sophia were worlds apart, one racing towards a hollow victory, the other left to find strength in the depths of heartbreak. Little did James know that his decision on this fateful day would come back to haunt him, challenging everything he thought he knew about success, love, and the true meaning of life. The seeds of regret were planted, waiting to bloom in the most unexpected way, forcing him to confront the consequences of choosing ambition over love. As Sophia finally found the strength to leave the cafe, she walked into the night with a mix of despair and determination. She placed a protective hand over her stomach, making a silent promise to her unborn child. "We'll be okay," she whispered, her voice gaining strength with each word. "We don't need him. I'll give you all the love in the world." Unknown to both James and Sophia, their story was far from over. The universe had a way of bringing balance, and the day would come when James would have to face the full weight of his choices. But for now, they walked separate paths, one towards a glittering but hollow future, the other towards a life filled with challenges, but also with the purest form of love. The New York City night enveloped them both, a silent witness to the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The stage was set for a drama that would unfold over decades, a tale of lost love, unknown legacy, and the possibility of redemption. 25 years had passed since that fateful day in the New York cafe. The world had changed, but James Carter's ambition remained as fierce as ever. Now, at 55, he stood at the pinnacle of success, a titan of industry whose name was synonymous with power and wealth. The young man who had once abandoned love for ambition had become a billionaire, his empire stretching across continents. On this crisp autumn evening, James sat at a corner table in Le Bernardin, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. The soft lighting cast a warm glow over the elegant space, the murmur of conversations providing a gentle backdrop to the high-stakes meeting about to unfold. James's fingers drummed impatiently on the pristine white tablecloth as he awaited his dinner guests, his mind already racing through potential strategies and outcomes. "Mr. Carter," a voice interrupted his thoughts. James looked up to see Thomas, his ever-present assistant, standing beside the table. "Your guests have arrived, sir." James nodded curtly, straightening his custom-tailored Armani suit. "Show them in, Thomas, and make sure we're not disturbed unless it's absolutely necessary." As Thomas retreated to escort the guests, James took a moment to center himself. This deal could be the crowning achievement of his career, the final piece in a puzzle he had been assembling for a quarter of a century. He closed his eyes briefly, using a technique he had learned years ago to focus his mind and channel his energy. When he opened them again, his gaze was sharp, his demeanor exuding confidence and control. The guests approached the table. Richard Holloway, CEO of a rival tech company, and his team of lawyers and advisors. James stood to greet them, his handshake firm, his smile calculated. "Richard, good to see you," James said, his voice smooth and controlled. "I trust the traffic wasn't too hellish." Richard, a man in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair, returned the smile with equal measure of practiced charm. Nothing we couldn't handle, James. Though I must say, your choice of venue has made the trip worthwhile. As they settled into their seats, James couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. Here he was, about to negotiate a deal that would reshape the tech landscape, and he held all the cards. This was what he had sacrificed everything for, this moment of power, this rush of impending victory. The waiter approached, offering menus and wine lists, but James waved them away. "We'll start with a bottle of the 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild," he said, not bothering to consult his guests. It was a power move, subtle but effective. The message was clear. This was his territory, his rules. As the sommelier busied himself with the wine, James leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking with Richard's. "Now, shall we get down to business?" Richard nodded, a hint of wariness in his eyes. "By all means, James. Though I hope you don't mind if we enjoy this excellent wine you've ordered while we talk." James allowed himself a small smile. "Of course not. I find a good vintage often helps. Lubricate negotiations." For the next hour, the two titans of industry engaged in a complex dance of proposals and counter-proposals. James was in his element, his mind sharp, his arguments incisive. He watched with growing satisfaction as Richard's team became increasingly uncomfortable, exchanging worried glances as James systematically dismantled their position. "Let's cut to the chase, Richard," James said finally, setting down his wine glass with a soft clink. "Your company is in trouble. Your last 3 product launches have been disasters, and your stock is tanking. You need this merger more than I do." Richard's face tightened, the facade of friendly negotiation crumbling. "That's a bit of an overstatement, don't you think, James? We've had some setbacks, sure, but nothing," James interrupted, his voice cold. "I'm offering you a lifeline here, a chance to save face and walk away with something. My offer is more than fair, considering the circumstances." The tension at the table was palpable. Richard's lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while his financial advisors wore expressions of barely concealed panic. James knew he had them cornered, and he was savoring every moment of it. Richard took a long sip of his wine, clearly stalling for time. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. "Your offer, it's significantly lower than what we discussed initially." James leaned back in his chair, a predatory smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Market conditions change, Richard. You of all people should understand that. This is my final offer. Take it, or I'll be more than happy to watch your company crumble and pick up the pieces for pennies on the dollar." The brutal honesty of James's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Richard looked around the table at his team, seeing defeat written on their faces. With a heavy sigh, he turned back to James. "You drive a hard bargain, Carter, but I suppose we don't have much choice, do we?" James's smile widened. "That's the nature of business, Richard. There are winners and losers. Today, I'm the winner." As Richard nodded his reluctant agreement, James felt the familiar rush of victory coursing through his veins. This was what he lived for, these moments of triumph, of bending the world to his will. As he signaled for Thomas to bring over the contracts, James allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had everything he had ever wanted: wealth, power, respect. He was at the top of his game, untouchable. And yet, as he watched Richard's defeated expression, a tiny voice in the back of his mind whispered a question he had long suppressed. Was it worth it? James pushed the thought away as quickly as it had come. Of course it was worth it. This was what he had sacrificed everything for. This was what truly mattered. As the contracts were laid out and pens were produced, James felt a strange sense of restlessness. He glanced around the restaurant, his eyes skimming over the other diners, the waitstaff moving efficiently between tables. It was then that something caught his eye. A woman entering the restaurant, accompanied by a young man. There was something hauntingly familiar about her, something that tugged at a long-buried memory. James found himself unable to look away, even as Richard began signing the contracts. The woman was in her early 50s, with an elegance that spoke of both confidence and grace. But it was her companion that truly captured James's attention. The young man, probably in his mid-20s, was the spitting image of James in his younger days. The same strong jawline, the same piercing eyes, even the same way of carrying himself. It was like looking at a ghost from the past, a reflection of the man he used to be. James felt a sudden, inexplicable tightness in his chest. Who were these people? Why did they affect him so strongly? James, are you all right? Richard's voice snapped him back to reality. James blinked, realizing he had been staring. He turned back to the table, where everyone was looking at him with a mixture of concern and confusion. "I'm fine," he said brusquely, reaching for the pen. "Just thought I saw someone I knew." As he signed his name with a flourish, sealing the deal that would further cement his business empire, James couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous had just occurred. He had achieved another victory, yes, but why did it suddenly feel hollow? Little did James know that this chance encounter would be the catalyst for a journey that would force him to confront his past, challenge everything he thought he knew about success, and perhaps offer a chance at redemption he never knew he needed. As the dinner concluded and handshakes were exchanged, James found his eyes drawn once again to the woman and her young companion. They were being seated at a table across the restaurant, laughing and talking with an ease that stirred something long forgotten within him. For the first time in years, James Carter, the man who had sacrificed love for ambition, felt a crack in the armor he had so carefully constructed around his heart. The stage was set for a confrontation with the ghosts of his past, and the consequences of the choice he had made 25 years ago were about to come full circle. James Carter sat motionless at his table, the signed contracts before him forgotten. His eyes were fixed on the woman and young man across the restaurant, a storm of emotions brewing within him. The bustling atmosphere of Le Bernardin faded into the background as memories long suppressed began to surface. "Mr. Carter," Thomas's voice barely registered. "Is everything all right, sir?" James blinked, tearing his gaze away from the pair. "Yes, Thomas. I'm fine." His voice lacked its usual confidence. "Just give me a moment." As Thomas retreated, James found his eyes drawn back to the woman. There was no doubt now. It was Sophia. The years had been kind to her. She carried herself with a grace and confidence that seemed to radiate through the room. But it was the young man beside her that truly captured James's attention. The resemblance was uncanny. The same strong jawline, the same piercing eyes that James saw every morning in the mirror. But there was something else there too, a warmth, a light that James recognized from long ago. It was the same light he had seen in Sophia's eyes all those years ago, before he had extinguished it with his cruel abandonment. A wave of memories washed over James, threatening to drown him in regret and what-ifs. He saw himself and Sophia, young and in love, planning a future together. He remembered the excitement in her eyes when they talked about starting a family. And then, with a pang of shame so sharp it was almost physical, he remembered the day he had walked away from it all. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. This young man, who couldn't be more than 25, had to be his son. The son he never knew existed, the son he had abandoned before he was even born. James's hand trembled as he reached for his water glass, nearly knocking it over. The cool liquid did nothing to quench the sudden dryness in his throat. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't in decades. The carefully constructed walls of his empire suddenly felt paper-thin. Across the restaurant, Sophia laughed at something the young man said, the sound carrying over the ambient noise. It was a sound James hadn't heard in 25 years, but one he realized he had never truly forgotten. It stirred something deep within him, a longing for a life he had willingly discarded. "I have to talk to them," James muttered to himself, half rising from his chair. "Sir." Thomas was at his side instantly, concern etched on his face. "Is there something you need?" James hesitated, his usual decisiveness deserting him. What would he even say? How could he possibly explain or justify his actions after all these years? The thought of confronting Sophia and the son he never knew filled him with a terror he had never experienced in the cutthroat world of business. "No, Thomas," he said finally, sinking back into his chair. "Not yet. I need to think." As Thomas nodded and stepped away, James found himself unable to look away from Sophia and the young man. He watched their interactions, hungry for every detail. The way Sophia's eyes crinkled when she smiled, the animated gestures of the young man as he spoke, the easy familiarity between them. It was all a stark reminder of what James had given up. The young man, his son, James reminded himself with a jolt, was clearly intelligent and passionate. James caught snippets of their conversation, something about a new environmental project the young man was working on. He spoke with a conviction that James recognized, the same drive that had propelled him to the top of the business world. But there was something else there too, a compassion and idealism that James had long ago discarded as weaknesses. As he continued to observe them, James felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest. It wasn't the sharp pain of loss or the dull throb of regret, but something deeper and more profound. It was the ache of a void he hadn't even known existed, a space within him that should have been filled with the love of family and the joy of watching his child grow. For the first time in decades, James Carter, the titan of industry, the man who had sacrificed everything for success, felt truly and utterly lost. The sounds of the restaurant seemed to fade away as James grappled with the enormity of the moment. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every aspect of his life, to bend circumstances to his will. But this was beyond his control. This was the consequence of a choice made 25 years ago, a choice he had convinced himself was the right one. James's mind raced, trying to process the situation with the same analytical precision he applied to business deals. But emotions kept interfering, clouding his judgment. He found himself wondering about the life this young man had lived, the milestones James had missed. First words, first steps, first day of school, all moments that should have been etched in his memory, now lost forever. As he watched, the young man reached across the table and took Sophia's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. The gesture was so natural, so full of love and support, that James felt like an intruder just witnessing it. He had walked away from the chance to be part of moments like these, convinced that they were a distraction from his true path to success. But now, surrounded by the trappings of his hard-won empire, James felt a hollowness he couldn't ignore. The contracts on the table, the multi-million-dollar deal he had just closed, they all seemed insignificant in the face of this unexpected reunion. James's hand moved to his chest, feeling the rapid beating of his heart. He was a man accustomed to making split-second decisions that affected the lives of thousands, yet he found himself paralyzed by indecision. Should he approach them? What right did he have to disrupt their lives after all this time? As if sensing his turmoil, Sophia suddenly looked up, her eyes scanning the restaurant. For a heart-stopping moment, her gaze locked with James's. Recognition flashed in her eyes, followed quickly by a mix of emotions James couldn't quite decipher: surprise, pain, anger, and something else, something that made James's breath catch in his throat. Time seemed to stand still as they stared at each other across the crowded room. In that moment, 25 years dissolved, and James was once again the young man who had walked away from the only woman he had ever truly loved. Sophia's expression hardened, a protective arm moving almost instinctively towards her son, their son. The young man, noticing his mother's sudden tension, turned to follow her gaze. As his eyes fell on James, there was no recognition, only curiosity at the stranger who had captured his mother's attention. James felt rooted to his chair, unable to move, unable to breathe. The weight of his past choices pressed down on him, threatening to crush him. He had faced hostile takeovers, market crashes, and cutthroat competitors, but nothing had prepared him for this moment of reckoning. With a supreme effort of will, James managed to tear his gaze away, turning back to the table. His hands shook as he reached for the contracts, shuffling them aimlessly. He needed to leave, to escape the suffocating weight of regret and missed opportunities that filled the air. "Thomas!" he called, his voice hoarse. "We're leaving." Now, as Thomas hurried to gather their things, James risked one last glance at Sophia and the young man. They were engaged in an intense, whispered conversation. Sophia's face a mask of concern and determination. The young man, his son, James reminded himself again, looked confused and worried. Standing up, James straightened his suit jacket, an automatic gesture that felt hollow and meaningless. As he prepared to leave, he realized that walking away this time felt infinitely harder than it had 25 years ago. Back then, he had been fueled by ambition and the certainty that he was making the right choice. Now, he was filled with doubt, regret, and a desperate longing for a life he had never allowed himself to live. As James moved towards the exit, he felt Sophia's eyes on him, boring into his back. He resisted the urge to turn around, to run back and try to explain, to beg for forgiveness, to meet the son he had never known. Instead, he kept walking, each step feeling like a betrayal all over again. Outside, the cool night air hit James like a physical blow. He stood on the sidewalk, letting the noise and bustle of New York City wash over him. For the first time in as long as he could remember, James Carter felt utterly and completely lost. As his car pulled up and Thomas opened the door, James paused. He looked back at the restaurant, knowing that inside were two people who represented everything he had given up. In that moment, he made a decision. This time, he wouldn't walk away. This time, he would face the consequences of his choices, no matter how difficult or painful it might be. "Thomas," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "And find out everything you can about that young man in there, and about Sophia Mitchell." As the car door closed behind him, James Carter, the man who had once abandoned love for ambition, set out on a new journey, one that would force him to confront his past, challenge everything he thought he knew about success, and perhaps offer a chance at redemption he never knew he needed or wanted. The New York City night enveloped the car as it pulled away from the curb, carrying James towards an uncertain future. The stage was set for a drama that would test the limits of forgiveness, the power of love, and the true meaning of success. The man who had spent a lifetime building walls around his heart now faced the daunting task of tearing them down, one painful brick at a time. The following morning, James Carter stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, overlooking the sprawling cityscape of New York. The early sun glinted off the glass and steel of the surrounding skyscrapers, but James barely noticed the familiar view. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the previous night over and over again. The image of Sophia and the young man, his son, was burned into his memory. It haunted him, challenging everything he thought he knew about his life and success. James ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, a gesture of frustration he rarely allowed himself. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, not turning from the window. Thomas entered, a folder tucked under his arm. "Mr. Carter, I have the information you requested." James turned slowly, his face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. And Thomas hesitated, sensing the unusual tension in his boss. "Sir, are you sure you want to proceed with this? It's not our usual type of investigation." James's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and desperation. "Just give me the damn folder, Thomas." Wordlessly, Thomas handed over the file and retreated from the office. James stared at the folder in his hands, his heart racing. Inside were the answers to questions he had never allowed himself to ask, details of a life he had willfully abandoned. With a deep breath, he opened the folder and began to read. Sophia Mitchell, now 54, had built a successful career as the environmental lawyer. She had never married. And then there was Lucas Mitchell, aged 24, a recent graduate with a degree in environmental science, currently working on innovative green energy projects. James's eyes lingered on Lucas's photo. The resemblance was undeniable, the same strong jawline, the same piercing blue eyes. But there was something else there too, a warmth and openness that James recognized from his younger self before ambition had hardened him. As he read through Lucas's accomplishments, top of his class, numerous awards for environmental activism, a promising career ahead of him, James felt a strange mix of pride and regret. This was his son, achieving great things, making a difference in the world, and James had played no part in it. The weight of his choices pressed down on him, threatening to crush the carefully constructed image of success he had built over the years. For the first time in decades, James Carter felt truly and utterly lost. He sank into his leather chair, the folder open on his desk. What was he supposed to do with this information? How could he possibly make up for 25 years of absence? As if on cue, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carter," his secretary's voice came through. "Your 10 o'clock is here." James closed his eyes, taking a moment to compose himself. "Send them in," he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. As his team filed in for the morning meeting, James found it increasingly difficult to focus. The discussion of profit margins and market shares seemed trivial in comparison to the revelation he had just experienced. He nodded mechanically, offering perfunctory responses, his mind elsewhere. "Mr. Carter," one of his executives looked at him expectantly. "Your thoughts on the merger?" James blinked, realizing he had completely lost track of the conversation. I need some time to consider all the angles," he said, buying himself some time. "Let's reconvene this afternoon." As the room cleared, James remained seated, staring at the folder on his desk. He had spent his entire career making tough decisions, but none had ever felt as daunting as the one he faced now. Should he reach out to Sophia and Lucas? What right did he have to disrupt their lives after all this time? And yet, the thought of letting this opportunity slip away, of never knowing his son, filled him with a dread he had never experienced before. James stood up abruptly, grabbing his jacket. "Cancel my appointments for the day," he told his surprised secretary as he strode past her desk. "I have some personal matters to attend to." The busy streets of New York engulfed him as he left his building. For once, James Carter, the man who always had a driver and a destination, found himself walking aimlessly, lost in thought. His feet carried him to Central Park, where he and Sophia had spent countless hours in their youth. As he walked along the familiar paths, memories flooded back, picnics by the lake, stolen kisses under the shade of ancient trees, dreams shared on starlit nights. James found himself at the Bethesda fountain, where he and Sophia had often met. He sat on a bench, watching the play of light on the water, remembering the last time he had been here, the day he told Sophia he was leaving, the pain in her eyes, the tremor in her voice as she pleaded with him to reconsider. It all came rushing back with startling clarity. How could he have been so cold, so certain that success was worth sacrificing love? As he sat there, grappling with regret and indecision, a familiar figure caught his eye. Sophia was walking along the path, her pace leisurely, lost in thought. James's heart raced. Was this a coincidence, or had some greater force brought them to this spot? Before he could decide whether to approach her or retreat, Sophia looked up. Their eyes met across the distance, and time seemed to stand still. For a moment, James saw a flicker of the young woman he had loved, hopeful, vibrant, full of life. But it was quickly replaced by a guarded expression, a protective shield built over years of hurt and abandonment. James stood slowly, his legs feeling unsteady. He took a tentative step forward, then another. Sophia remained rooted to the spot, her expression a mix of surprise, anger, and something else, a flicker of the connection they once shared. "Sophia," James said softly as he approached, his voice barely above a whisper. "James," she replied, her tone neutral but her eyes betraying a whirlwind of emotions. They stood there, two people with a shared past and an uncertain future, the bustling park fading into the background. James searched for words, but for once in his life, he found himself at a loss. I saw you last night," he finally managed. "At Le Bernardin." Sophia nodded slowly. "I saw you too." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and buried emotions. "The young man with you," James began, his voice trailing off. "Lucas," Sophia supplied, a protective edge creeping into her voice. "My son," James swallowed hard. "Our son," he said softly, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. Sophia's eyes flashed with a mix of pain and anger. "No, James, my son. You gave up any right to call him yours 25 years ago." The words hit James like a physical blow. He had known it would be difficult, but nothing had prepared him for the raw hurt in Sophia's voice. "Sophia, I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. "I know I have no right to—" "You're right," Sophia cut him off. "You have no right. No right to come back into our lives after all this time. No right to disrupt the life I've built for myself and my son." James flinched at the emphasis on "my son," but he pressed on. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Sophia, but please, just give me a chance to explain." Sophia laughed bitterly. "Explain? What is there to explain, James? You made your choice. You chose your ambition over love, over family. What could you possibly say now that would change that?" James felt the weight of his past choices pressing down on him. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I thought I knew what I wanted, what would make me happy. But I was wrong, Sophia. So terribly wrong." For a moment, Sophia's hard expression softened, a glimpse of the woman he had once known shining through, but it was quickly replaced by a look of determination. "And it's too late, James," she said, her voice firm but tinged with sadness. "We've both moved on. Lucas has grown into an amazing young man, and he's done it without you. He doesn't need you now." James felt a sharp pain in his chest at her words. "And you, Sophia, have you truly moved on?" Sophia's eyes met his, and for a moment, James saw a flicker of the love they once shared, but it was quickly extinguished, replaced by a steely resolve. "I had to," she said softly. "For Lucas, for myself. You left us no choice." James nodded, understanding the magnitude of what he had done. "I know I have no right to ask this, Sophia, but is there any chance at all that I could meet Lucas, that I could try to make amends?" Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her internal struggle visible on her face. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, James. I honestly don't know if that's possible, or if it's even a good idea." James felt a glimmer of hope at her words. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't an outright no either. "I understand," he said. "I know I'm asking for more than I deserve, but please, Sophia, think about it. I want to try to make things right, even if it's too late, even if Lucas never wants to know me. I need to try." Sophia looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since their encounter began. She saw the lines of regret etched on his face, the desperation in his eyes. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the man she had once loved, the man who had promised her the world. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "But I'm not promising anything, James. My priority is Lucas. It always has been, and it always will be." James nodded, feeling a mix of relief and trepidation. "Thank you, Sophia. That's more than I could have hoped for." As Sophia turned to leave, James called out to her one last time. "Sophia," she paused, looking back at him. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I never stopped loving you. Not really." Sophia's expression softened for a moment, a hint of the young woman she once was shining through. "Oh, goodbye, James," she said softly, before turning and walking away. James watched her go, his heart heavy with regret and a newfound determination. He had made the biggest mistake of his life 25 years ago, walking away from love and family. Now, he had been given a second chance, a chance to make amends, to know his son, to rediscover the man he once was. As he stood there, watching Sophia's retreating figure, James Carter made a silent vow. He would do whatever it took to earn a place in Lucas's life, to make up for lost time, to become the father he should have been all along. It wouldn't be easy, and success was far from guaranteed. But for the first time in 25 years, James felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with business or ambition. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and potential heartbreak. But as James left the park, heading back to the world he had built for himself, he felt a glimmer of hope. The journey of redemption had begun, and James Carter was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The bustling streets of New York City pulsed with energy as Lucas Mitchell made his way through the crowded sidewalks. At 24, he moved with a confident stride, his eyes bright with purpose and determination. The early morning sun glinted off the glass towers surrounding him, a testament to the ambition and drive that built this concrete jungle. Lucas adjusted his messenger bag, filled with plans and proposals for his latest environmental project. Today was a big day. He had a meeting with potential investors who could make his green energy initiative a reality. As he navigated the busy streets, his mind raced with possibilities, rehearsing his pitch and anticipating questions. Turning a corner, Lucas nearly collided with a man in an expensive suit. "Sorry," he mumbled, sidestepping quickly. But as he moved past, something made him pause. There was something oddly familiar about the man's profile, a nagging sense of déjà vu that Lucas couldn't quite place. Shaking off the strange feeling, Lucas continued on his way. He had more important things to focus on than mysterious strangers. As he approached the towering office building where his meeting was scheduled, Lucas took a deep breath, centering himself. Inside the sleek lobby, Lucas checked in with the receptionist and was directed to a conference room on the 30th floor. As the elevator ascended, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was his chance to make a real difference, to put his ideas into action and create meaningful change. The elevator doors opened, revealing a plush corridor lined with artwork. Lucas straightened his tie, a gift from his mother for his college graduation. Sophia's words echoed in his mind. "You can change the world, Lucas. I believe in you." With renewed determination, Lucas entered the conference room. 5 people were already seated around the large table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Lucas recognized some of them from his research, CEOs and executives from some of the city's biggest corporations. "Good morning," Lucas said, his voice steady and confident. "Thank you all for taking the time to hear my proposal." As Lucas began his presentation, he felt the familiar rush of passion for his work. He spoke about the urgent need for sustainable energy solutions, the potential for job creation, and the long-term benefits for both the environment and the economy. His words flowed smoothly, backed by carefully researched data and innovative ideas. Throughout his pitch, Lucas couldn't help but notice one of the executives in particular. The man seemed oddly familiar, though Lucas was sure they had never met. There was something about his piercing blue eyes and the set of his jaw that tugged at Lucas's memory. As the presentation concluded, the room fell silent for a moment. Lucas held his breath, waiting for the response. Then, slowly, one of the executives began to clap. Others joined in, and soon the room was filled with applause. "Impressive work, Mr. Mitchell," said the CEO of a major energy company. "Your passion and knowledge are evident. We'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss this further." Lucas felt a surge of elation. This was even better than he had hoped for. As the executives filed out of the room, offering handshakes and words of encouragement, the familiar-looking man approached. "That was quite a presentation, Lucas," he said, his voice carrying a weight of emotion that seemed out of place for a business meeting. You have a real gift for this, Lucas smiled, still trying to place where he might have seen this man before. Thank you, sir. I didn't catch your name. The man hesitated for a moment, an unreadable expression crossing his face. James, he said finally. James Carter. Lucas nodded, the name not ringing any bells. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Carter. I appreciate your support for the project. James seemed about to say something more, but then thought better of it. Keep up the good work, Lucas, he said instead, before turning and leaving the room. As Lucas gathered his materials, still riding high on the success of his presentation, he couldn't shake the odd feeling about James Carter. There was something in the man's eyes, a mixture of pride and pain that seemed out of place in a business setting. Stepping out into the bright New York day, Lucas pulled out his phone to call his mother. Sophia answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "How did it go, sweetheart?" she asked, the hint of anxiety in her tone betraying how much she had been thinking about this meeting. "It went great, Mom," Lucas replied, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "They want to schedule a follow-up meeting. I think this might really happen." Sophia's joy was palpable even through the phone. "Oh, Lucas, I'm so proud of you. I always knew you could do it." As Lucas recounted the details of the meeting, he found himself hesitating when he came to James Carter. Something held him back from mentioning the strange sense of familiarity he had felt. "Is everything okay, Lucas?" Sophia asked, picking up on his pause. "You sound distracted." Lucas shook his head, even though his mother couldn't see him. "It's nothing, Mom, just a lot to process. Hey, are we still on for dinner tonight?" "Of course," Sophia replied, her voice warm. "I can't wait to hear all about it in person. I love you, sweetheart." "Love you too, Mom," Lucas said, ending the call. As he made his way back to his apartment, Lucas's mind wandered back to James Carter. There was something about the man that nagged at him, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. But with the success of his presentation and the promise of future meetings, Lucas pushed the thought aside. He had more important things to focus on. Little did Lucas know that this chance encounter would be the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his life, his family, and his place in the world. Back in his office, James Carter sat at his desk, staring at the photo of Lucas he had procured. The young man's passion and intelligence had been evident throughout the presentation, stirring a complex mix of emotions in James. Pride in his son's accomplishments warred with the crushing guilt of his absence. James picked up his phone, his finger hovering over Sophia's number. He had promised to give her time to think about whether to allow him into Lucas's life, but the urge to reach out was almost overwhelming. Seeing Lucas in person, hearing him speak with such conviction about making the world a better place, it had shaken James to his core. With a heavy sigh, James set the phone down. He had made his choice 25 years ago, and now he had to live with the consequences. The path to redemption, if there was one, would not be easy or quick. As the day wore on, both Lucas and James found their thoughts returning to their brief encounter. Lucas, still riding high on the success of his presentation, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to James Carter than met the eye. And James, surrounded by the trappings of his hard-won success, felt the hollowness of his achievements in the face of the son he had never known. That evening, as Lucas sat across from his mother at their favorite Italian restaurant, he found himself studying her face. There was something in her eyes, a mix of pride and melancholy that he had never fully understood. "Mom," he said, setting down his fork, "can I ask you something?" Sophia looked up, her expression open and loving. "Of course, sweetheart. You can ask me anything." Lucas hesitated, unsure how to phrase his question. "I've always wondered about my father. You've never really talked about him." Sophia's face froze for a moment, a flicker of pain crossing her features before she composed herself. "Lucas, what brought this on?" Lucas shrugged, trying to appear casual despite the weight of the moment. "I don't know. I guess seeing all those executives today, it made me think about family. about where I came from." Sophia reached across the table, taking her son's hand. "You came from love, Lucas. Never doubt that. Your father, he made his choices, and I made mine. I chose you, and I've never regretted that for a moment." Lucas squeezed his mother's hand, feeling the strength and love that had always been his anchor. "I know, Mom, and I'm grateful for everything you've done. I wonder sometimes, you know." Sophia nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I know, sweetheart, and maybe it's time we talked about it. But not tonight. Okay, tonight is for celebrating your success." Lucas nodded, recognizing the pain in his mother's eyes and not wanting to push further. As they resumed their meal, the conversation turned back to lighter topics, but the unspoken questions lingered in the air between them. Across town, in his penthouse apartment, James Carter stood at the window, looking out over the city he had conquered. In his hand, he held a glass of expensive scotch, but it brought him no comfort. His mind was filled with images of Lucas, the son he had never known, the life he had missed out on. James took a sip of his drink, the amber liquid burning a path down his throat. He had spent his entire life chasing success, convinced that it would bring him happiness. But now, faced with the reality of the family he had abandoned, all of his achievements felt hollow. As the night deepened, 3 souls in the vast city of New York found themselves at a crossroads. Lucas, on the brink of realizing his dreams but questioning his origins. Sophia, proud of the son she had raised alone, but grappling with the ghosts of her past. And James, a man who had everything money could buy, but was only now realizing the true cost of his ambition. The stage was set for revelations that would shake their worlds to the core. As the city that never sleeps pulsed with life around them, Lucas, Sophia, and James stood on the precipice of a truth that would change everything. The journey ahead would be fraught with pain, confrontation, and the possibility of redemption, testing the bounds of love, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family. The following morning, James Carter sat in his opulent office, his mind far from the stack of contracts and reports piled on his desk. The events of the previous day played on repeat in his mind. Lucas's impressive presentation, the unmistakable pride he'd felt watching his son command the room, and the crushing weight of his absence in Lucas's life. James picked up his phone, scrolling to Sophia's number for what felt like the 100th time. His finger hovered over the call button, but he hesitated. He had promised to give her time, to let her decide if and when he could be a part of Lucas's life. But the urge to reach out, to try and bridge the chasm of years, was almost overwhelming. A knock on his office door interrupted his internal struggle. "Come in," he called, setting the phone down with a mixture of relief and frustration. Thomas entered, his face a mask of professional concern. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a development with the Mitchell project." James straightened in his chair, his interest piqued. "What kind of development?" Thomas hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "It seems that some of our board members have raised concerns about the viability of the project. They're pushing for a more traditional approach." James felt a surge of anger. "Traditional? You mean environmentally destructive and short-sighted?" "Sir, I'm just relaying the message," Thomas said, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "They've called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon to discuss the matter." James stood up, his jaw set in determination. "Thank you, Thomas. I'll handle this." As Thomas left the office, James turned to look out the window, his mind racing. He knew exactly what was happening. The old guard, set in their ways, threatened by change and innovation. They saw Lucas's project as a risk, a departure from the tried and true methods that had lined their pockets for decades. For a moment, James felt the familiar thrill of a business challenge. This was what he excelled at, outmaneuvering opponents, bending circumstances to his will. But then he paused, a realization hitting him like a physical blow. This wasn't just another business deal. This was his son's dream, the culmination of years of hard work and passion. James returned to his desk, picking up his phone once again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He dialed Sophia's number, his heart racing as the phone rang. "James!" Sophia's voice was cautious, guarded. "I thought we agreed." "I know, Sophia," James interrupted, his voice urgent. "And I'm sorry, but this is important. It's about Lucas." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and James could almost feel Sophia's internal struggle. Finally, she spoke, her voice tight with concern. "What about Lucas?" James took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "His project, the one he presented yesterday, it's in trouble. Some of my board members want to shut it down before it even gets started." "What?" Sophia's voice was sharp with anger and worry. "But why? Lucas said the presentation went well." "It did," James assured her. "Lucas was brilliant. But change is scary for some people, especially when it threatens their bottom line." There was another pause, longer this time. When Sophia spoke again, her voice was filled with a mix of emotions James couldn't quite decipher. "Why are you telling me this, James? What do you want?" James closed his eyes, steeling himself for what he was about to say. "I want to help, Sophia. I can fight for this project, make sure it gets the support it needs. But I need your permission. I need to be able to tell Lucas who I am." The silence that followed was deafening. James could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears as he waited for Sophia's response. "James," Sophia finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you can't just waltz back into our lives and play the hero. It's not that simple." "I know it's not," James replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Believe me, Sophia, I know. But this is Lucas's dream. I can't stand by and watch it get crushed before it even has a chance." Sophia sighed, a sound filled with years of pain and uncertainty. "And what happens after, James? If you swoop in and save the day, then what? Have you thought about what this will do to Lucas, to me?" James felt the weight of his past choices pressing down on him. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't have all the answers, but I do know that I want to try. I want to be there for Lucas, in whatever way he'll allow." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and buried emotions. Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "Okay, James, you can tell him, but not alone. We do this together." Relief washed over James, followed quickly by a surge of anxiety. "Thank you, Sophia. When should we do this?" "Today," Sophia said firmly. "If Lucas's project is in danger, he needs to know everything. Can you meet us at my apartment this evening?" James nodded, then remembered Sophia couldn't see him. "Yes, of course. I'll be there." As he ended the call, James felt a mix of hope and trepidation. He had dreamed of this moment for years, the chance to finally meet his son, to try and make amends for his absence. But now that it was actually happening, he felt woefully unprepared. The rest of the day passed in a blur. James went through the motions of his usual routine, attending meetings and making decisions, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about Lucas, about the life he had missed, about the man his son had become without him. As evening approached, James left his office, ignoring the curious looks from his employees. It was rare for James Carter to leave work early, but today was far from ordinary. The drive to Sophia's apartment was tense, each mile bringing James closer to a confrontation with his past. As he pulled up to the building, he took a moment to collect himself. This wasn't a business deal or a corporate takeover. This was his family, the people he had hurt most in the world. With a deep breath, James stepped out of the car and entered the building. The elevator ride to Sophia's floor felt like an eternity, each floor bringing him closer to a moment that would change everything. Finally, he stood in front of Sophia's door. James raised his hand to knock, then paused, his heart racing. This was it. There was no turning back now. He knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. For a moment, there was silence. Then the door opened, revealing Sophia. She looked at him with a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and something else, something that made James's heart ache with remembered love. "Come in," Sophia said softly, stepping aside to let him enter. As James stepped into the apartment, he saw Lucas sitting on the couch, his expression confused and slightly wary. The young man stood as James entered, his eyes moving between his mother and the stranger who had just arrived. "Mom?" Lucas said, his voice filled with questions. "What's going on? Who is this?" Sophia took a deep breath, moving to stand beside her son. She placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder, a gesture of support and love. "Lucas, sweetheart, there's something we need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." Lucas looked at his mother, then at James, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Mom, you're scaring me. What is it?" Sophia looked at James, her eyes filled with a silent plea. James stepped forward, his heart pounding so hard he was sure the others could hear it. "Lucas," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "my name is James Carter, and I'm your father." The words hung in the air, heavy with years of secrets and unspoken truths. Lucas's eyes widened in shock, his gaze darting between James and Sophia, searching for confirmation or denial. "What?" Lucas finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, is this true?" Sophia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, it's true. James is your father." Lucas stumbled back, sinking onto the couch. His world, so solid just moments ago, had been turned upside down. He looked at James, really looked at him for the first time, and saw the resemblance that had nagged at him during their brief encounter at the presentation. "But why?" Lucas asked, his voice filled with confusion and hurt. "Why now? Where have you been all this time?" James felt the weight of his past choices pressing down on him. This was the moment of truth, the chance to explain himself, to try and make amends for years of absence. "Lucas," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I made a terrible mistake 25 years ago. I chose my career over love, over family. I thought success and money were all that mattered. But I was wrong, so terribly wrong." Lucas listened, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. James continued, pouring out the truth he had held inside for so long. "I didn't know about you when I left," James admitted, "but that doesn't excuse my actions. I should have been there. I should have been a father to you, and I will regret that decision for the rest of my life." Sophia stepped in, her voice gentle but firm. "Marty Lucas, I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us. You are my son, and I love you more than anything in this world." Lucas nodded, still trying to process this life-altering revelation. "But why tell me now?" he asked, looking between his parents. "After all this time, why now?" James took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he had to say next. "Because your project, the one you presented yesterday, it's in danger. Some of my board members want to shut it down, and I want to help. I want to fight for your dream, Lucas." Lucas stood up abruptly, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and disbelief. "So that's it? You show up after 24 years because you want to play the hero, save my project and all is forgiven." "No, Lucas, that's not," James began, but Lucas cut him off. "I don't need your help," Lucas said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I've made it this far without you. I don't need you now." With that, Lucas stormed out of the apartment, leaving James and Sophia standing in stunned silence. The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing in the suddenly quiet room. James turned to Sophia, his face a mask of pain and regret. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this." Sophia sighed, sinking onto the couch. "I know, James, but what did you expect? You can't undo 24 years of absence in one conversation." James nodded, feeling the weight of his choices more acutely than ever. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Sophia looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "We give him time, James, and we hope that someday he'll be ready to listen." As James left the apartment, his mind was in turmoil. He had finally told his son the truth, but at what cost? The path to redemption, he realized, would be long and difficult, But as he stepped out into the New York night, James Carter made a silent vow. He would not give up. He would fight for his son's dream and for a chance to be a part of his life, no matter how long it took. The city stretched out before him, a testament to his professional success. But for the first time in 25 years, James realized that true success wasn't measured in dollars or deals. It was measured in the love of family, in the connections we forge with others, and he had a lot of catching up to do. The early morning light filtered through the windows of Lucas's small apartment, casting long shadows across the cluttered living room. Lucas sat on his worn couch, his eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night, staring at the coffee table covered in papers and plans for his green energy project. The events of the previous evening played on repeat in his mind, each recollection bringing a fresh wave of confusion and anger. His father, James Carter, the man he had met briefly at his presentation, the man who had been absent for his entire life, was suddenly here, offering help and explanations that felt 24 years too late. Lucas ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to rage against James, to reject any offer of help or reconciliation. Another part, a part he was trying desperately to ignore, was curious. What would it be like to have a father after all these years? To have someone else in his corner, fighting for his dreams? A soft knock on the door interrupted his tumultuous thoughts. Lucas hesitated, not sure if he was ready to face anyone. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Lucas, it's Mom. Please, can we talk?" With a heavy sigh, Lucas pushed himself off the couch and made his way to the door. He opened it to find Sophia standing there, her face etched with concern and love. "Hey, sweetie," she said softly, her eyes searching his face. "Can I come in?" Lucas nodded, stepping aside to let her enter. Sophia looked around the apartment, taking in the scattered papers and the general disarray. Her heart ached for her son, knowing the turmoil he must be feeling. "I'm sorry I ran out last night," Lucas said, his voice hoarse. I couldn't handle it." Sophia moved to him, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Oh, Lucas, you have nothing to apologize for. I'm the one who should be sorry. I should have told you about James a long time ago." Lucas allowed himself to be held for a moment, drawing comfort from his mother's familiar warmth. Then he pulled away, moving back to the couch and sinking down onto it. "Why didn't you?" he asked, his voice small. "Why keep it a secret all these years?" Sophia sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I thought I was protecting you," she admitted. "James made his choice all those years ago, and I didn't want you to grow up feeling unwanted." Lucas flinched at the word, and Sophia quickly continued, "But that was wrong of me. You deserved to know the truth, and I'm so sorry I kept it from you." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of secrets hanging between them. Finally, Lucas spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me about him, about my father." Sophia took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "James and I met in college. He was brilliant, ambitious, and I fell head over heels in love. We had big dreams, plans for the future. But as time went on, James became more and more focused on his career. He saw success as the ultimate goal, and everything else, well, it took a back seat." Lucas listened intently, trying to reconcile this story with the man he had met briefly at his presentation. "So he just left, just like that?" Sophia nodded, her eyes distant with memories. "He got a job offer on the West Coast, a chance to climb the corporate ladder faster than he ever could here. I begged him to stay, to choose us over his ambition, but in the end, his career won out." "And you never told him about me?" Lucas asked, a hint of accusation in his voice. Sophia shook her head. "I found out I was pregnant after he left. I tried to contact him, but he had already changed his number, moved away. It was like he had vanished, and after a while, I stopped trying." Lucas absorbed this information, his mind racing. "And now he's back, wanting to play dad and save my project. How convenient." Sophia reached out, taking her son's hand. "Lucas, I know this is a lot to process, and you have every right to be angry, to feel hurt. But James, he seems genuinely remorseful. He wants to make amends. Lucas pulled his hand away, standing up and pacing the small living room. Make amends? How? By swooping in and using his money and influence to save my project. I don't need his help. I can do this on my own. Sophia watched her son, her heart breaking for the pain he was going through. I know you can, sweetheart. You're brilliant and capable, and I have no doubt you'll succeed with or without James's help. But maybe this is a chance for both of you to get to know each other. Lucas stopped pacing, turning to face his mother. Do you want that? For me to have a relationship with him? Sophia stood, moving to her son and placing her hands on his shoulders. What I want is for you to be happy, Lucas. If getting to know James will bring you peace or answers or anything positive, then yes, I want that for you. But if it will only bring you pain, then you owe him nothing. Lucas nodded, feeling the weight of the decision before him. I don't know what I want, he admitted. I'm so angry with him, but at the same time, I can't help but be curious. Sophia pulled him into another hug. That's okay, sweetheart. You don't have to decide anything right now. Take your time, think it through, and know that no matter what, I'm here for you, always. As Sophia left the apartment, Lucas felt a mix of emotions swirling within him. The anger was still there, burning hot in his chest. But alongside it was a spark of curiosity, a desire to know more about the man who was his father. Across town, in his penthouse office, James Carter sat at his desk, staring at his phone. He had barely slept, his mind replaying the disastrous meeting with Lucas over and over. The hurt and anger in his son's eyes haunted him, a stark reminder of the consequences of his choices. With a heavy sigh, James picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. Thomas, I need you to push back the board meeting and I need you to gather all the information we have on Lucas's project. Every detail, every projection. I want to know everything. As he ended the call, James turned to look out the window at the city sprawling below. He had built an empire, conquered the business world, but now, faced with the challenge of connecting with his son, he felt completely out of his depth. A notification on his phone caught his attention. It was an email from Sophia, containing Lucas's contact information. James's heart raced as he read the short message accompanying it. James, I've given Lucas your number as well. The ball is in his court now. Whatever happens next, remember that he's been through a lot. Be patient. James nodded to himself, feeling a mix of hope and trepidation. He knew he had a long way to go, a lot to prove. But he was determined to try. With trembling fingers, he opened a new message and began to type. Lucas, I know my sudden appearance in your life has caused you pain and confusion. I won't make excuses for my past actions, but I want you to know that I'm here now, and I want to make things right. Your project is brilliant, and I believe in it wholeheartedly. If you'll let me, I'd like to help ensure it gets the support it deserves. But more than that, I'd like a chance to get to know you. No pressure, no expectations, just a chance. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. James. James read and reread the message, agonizing over every word. Finally, with a deep breath, he hit send. The message disappeared into the ether, carrying with it James's hopes for redemption and connection. As the sun climbed higher in the New York sky, three souls found themselves at a crossroads. Lucas, grappling with the sudden appearance of a father he never knew. Sophia, navigating the delicate balance between protecting her son and allowing him to forge his own path. And James, desperate to make amends for a lifetime of absence, yet unsure of how to bridge the chasm he had created. The stage was set for a journey of reconciliation, forgiveness, and self-discovery. But the path ahead was far from clear, fraught with potential pitfalls and painful confrontations. As the day wore on, each of them faced the daunting task of taking the next step, knowing that their choices now would shape the course of their intertwined destinies. In the bustling heart of New York City, amidst the towering skyscrapers and endless possibilities, a family stood on the brink of either healing or further fracture. The coming days would test the strength of blood ties, the power of forgiveness, and the true meaning of family in ways none of them could have anticipated. The New York City skyline glowed in the fading light of dusk as Lucas Mitchell stood on the balcony of his small apartment, his fingers drumming nervously on the railing. His phone felt heavy in his pocket, James's message burning a hole in his consciousness. He had read and reread it countless times over the past few days, each time feeling a tumultuous mix of anger, curiosity, and an emotion he couldn't quite name, perhaps longing for the father he never knew. Inside, the TV droned on, a news anchor discussing the latest developments in renewable energy. Any other day, Lucas would have been glued to the screen, absorbing every detail. But tonight, his mind was elsewhere, grappling with a decision that felt monumental. With a deep breath, Lucas pulled out his phone and opened the message from James once more. "Lucas, I know my sudden appearance in your life has caused you pain and confusion. I won't make excuses for my past actions, but I want you to know that I'm here now, and I want to make things right. Your project is brilliant, and I believe in it wholeheartedly. If you'll let me, I'd like to help ensure it gets the support it deserves. But more than that, I'd like a chance to get to know you. No pressure, no expectations, just a chance. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. James." Lucas's thumb hovered over the reply button. Was he ready for this? Could he open himself up to the man who had been absent for his entire life? The rational part of his brain screamed at him to ignore the message, to protect himself from potential hurt. But another part, a part that sounded suspiciously like his mother's voice, whispered that sometimes the hardest choices were the ones most worth making. Before he could second-guess himself, Lucas began to type, "James, I appreciate your message. This situation is complicated, to say the least. I'm not sure I'm ready for a father-son relationship, but I'm willing to talk about the project, about the past, about everything. If you're free, maybe we could meet tomorrow evening. There's a coffee shop called The Daily Grind on 7th Avenue, 7 p.m. Lucas. Lucas hit send before he could change his mind, then let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It was done. For better or worse, he had taken the first step towards what? Reconciliation, understanding. He wasn't sure, but he knew he couldn't ignore this situation any longer. Across town, in his luxurious penthouse, James Carter was in the middle of a video conference when his phone buzzed with Lucas's reply. His heart leapt into his throat, and he found himself struggling to focus on the meeting. As soon as it was over, he practically lunged for his phone, reading Lucas's message with a mixture of hope and trepidation. James's fingers trembled slightly as he typed his response. "Lucas, thank you for giving me this chance. I'll be there. Looking forward to talking, James." As he hit send, James felt a wave of emotions wash over him. Relief that Lucas was willing to meet, anxiety about what they would discuss, and a deep-seated fear that he would somehow mess this up, pushing his son away for good. The next evening arrived with agonizing slowness. Lucas arrived at the Daily Grind early, choosing a quiet corner table that offered some privacy. He ordered a coffee, more for something to do with his hands than out of any real desire for caffeine. His leg bounced nervously under the table as he waited, his eyes darting to the door every time it opened. At precisely 7 p.m., James walked in. He looked different out of his business suit, dressed in casual slacks and a button-down shirt. His eyes scanned the coffee shop, landing on Lucas. For a moment, father and son locked eyes across the room, years of absence and unspoken words hanging between them. James made his way to the table, his usual confident stride replaced by a more hesitant gait. "Lucas," he said softly as he approached. "Thank you for meeting me." Lucas nodded, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Thanks for coming," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. As James sat down, an awkward silence fell between them. Both men reached for their drinks, more for something to do than out of thirst. Finally, Lucas spoke. "So, I guess we have a lot to talk about." James nodded, his eyes never leaving his son's face. "We do. Lucas, I don't even know where to begin. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover it, but I am. I'm so sorry for not being there, for missing out on your life." Lucas felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. "Dear, why?" he asked, his voice tight with emotion. "Why did you leave? Was your career really worth abandoning your family?" James flinched at the word abandoning, but he knew he deserved it. "At the time, I thought it was," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I was young, ambitious, and incredibly stupid. I thought success and money were all that mattered. I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing, that I could always start a family later when I had made it." Lucas listened, his hands clenched around his coffee cup. "And now, what changed?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Everything changed. I achieved all the success I thought I wanted, but it felt hollow. And then I saw you at that presentation, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I had a son, a brilliant, passionate son, and I had missed out on everything." Lucas absorbed this, his emotions a swirling mess. Part of him wanted to lash out, to make James feel the pain of his absence. But another part, a part that surprised him, felt a glimmer of understanding. "I won't lie," Lucas said finally. "It hurts, knowing you chose your career over us, over me. But I'm not here to rehash the past. I want to know why you're here now. Is it just because of my project?" James shook his head emphatically. "No, Lucas, the project is important, yes, and I want to help if you'll let me. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I want a chance to know you, to be a part of your life if you'll have me. I know I don't deserve it, and I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Lucas studied James's face, searching for any sign of insincerity. What he saw was a man grappling with regret, hope, and fear, emotions Lucas understood all too well. "I can't promise anything," Lucas said slowly. "I'm not ready to call you Dad, or pretend the past didn't happen, but I'm willing to try, to get to know you, to see where this goes." Relief washed over James's face. "That's more than I could have hoped for, Lucas. Thank you." As the conversation continued, they began to navigate the treacherous waters of their shared history and unknown future. Lucas spoke about his childhood, about the challenges of growing up without a father. James listened, his heart breaking with each story of missed father-son moments. In turn, James shared stories of his own life, of the emptiness he had felt even at the height of his success. He talked about seeing Lucas at the presentation, about the immediate connection he had felt. As the evening wore on, the tension between them began to ease slightly. They weren't quite comfortable with each other, but the hostility that had marked their first encounter had softened into something more like cautious curiosity. Finally, Lucas brought up the topic that had been hovering in the background. "So, about my project. You said some of your board members want to shut it down." James nodded, his expression turning serious. "Yes, some of the old guard see it as too risky, too much of a departure from our usual investments. But I believe in your vision, Lucas. If you'll let me, I want to fight for it." Lucas hesitated. He had worked so hard on this project, poured his heart and soul into it. The thought of it being shut down before it even got started was painful. But accepting help from James felt like a big step. I appreciate that," Lucas said slowly, "but I need to think about it. This project is important to me, and I don't want to jeopardize it by mixing in personal complications." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, take all the time you need. The offer stands, no strings attached. Whether you want my help with the project or not doesn't change my desire to be a part of your life." As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, both men felt the weight of the conversation they had just had. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. There were still hurts to heal, trust to build, but it was a start. "Thank you for meeting me, Lucas," James said as they stood. "I know this isn't easy, and I appreciate your willingness to give me a chance." Lucas nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's not easy," he agreed. "But I'm glad we talked. I can't promise anything, but I'm willing to see where this goes." As they parted ways outside the coffee shop, both father and son felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with potential pitfalls and painful conversations. But there was also the possibility of healing, of forging a connection that had been missing for far too long. Lucas watched James disappear into the New York night, his mind whirling with everything they had discussed. He pulled out his phone, dialing a familiar number. "Mom," he said when Sophia answered. "Yeah, I just finished meeting with James. Can I come over? I think I need to talk." As Lucas made his way to his mother's apartment, James returned to his penthouse. He poured himself a drink, looking out over the city he had conquered. For the first time in years, the view didn't fill him with pride. Instead, he felt a burning desire to prove himself worthy of the second chance he had been given. The night settled over New York City, a blanket of stars hidden behind the glow of city lights. In different parts of the city, 3 people lay awake, each grappling with the events of the evening and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The journey of reconciliation had begun, but the path forward was far from clear. Only time would tell if the bonds of family could overcome years of absence and hurt, forging a new relationship from the ashes of the past. The morning sun crept through the blinds of Sophia's cozy apartment, casting warm stripes across the living room floor. Lucas sat on the familiar couch, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands as he recounted his meeting with James to his mother. Sophia listened intently, her eyes never leaving her son's face, reading the complex emotions that played across his features. "I don't know, Mom," Lucas sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "And part of me wants to give him a chance, but another part is screaming to run as far away as possible. How do I even begin to trust someone who walked away before I was born?" Sophia reached out, placing a comforting hand on her son's knee. "Oh, sweetheart, I wish I had all the answers for you, but this is something you'll have to figure out for yourself. I can't tell you whether to trust James or not." Lucas nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "I know. It's just, he seems genuinely remorseful, and he wants to help with my project, but accepting his help feels like I'm condoning what he did. You know." Sophia was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Lucas, accepting help doesn't mean you're forgiving or forgetting. It's okay to have complicated feelings about this. James made a terrible mistake, but he's trying to make amends now. That doesn't erase the past, but it might be a step towards a better future." As Lucas mulled over his mother's words, across town, James Carter was facing his own internal struggle. He sat in his opulent office, staring unseeing at the pile of contracts on his desk. The meeting with Lucas had stirred up a maelstrom of emotions he had long suppressed. The intercom buzzed, startling James out of his reverie. "Mr. Carter?" His secretary's voice came through. "The board members are waiting for you in the conference room." James closed his eyes, taking a deep breath to center himself. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be right there." As he made his way to the conference room, James steeled himself for the battle ahead. He knew what was coming. The old guard of the company, set in their ways, pushing back against Lucas's innovative project. In the past, James might have sided with them, choosing the safe, profitable route. But now, with the memory of Lucas's passionate presentation fresh in his mind, he felt a fierce determination to fight for his son's vision. The conference room fell silent as James entered, all eyes turning to the man who had built this empire from the ground up. James took his seat at the head of the table, his face a mask of calm authority. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and commanding, "and I understand there are concerns about the green energy project proposed by Lucas Mitchell. I'm here to address those concerns and explain why I believe this project is not just viable, but essential for our company's future. For the next hour, James fought tooth and nail for Lucas's project. He presented data, projections, and impassioned arguments about the importance of embracing sustainable energy. As he spoke, he felt a growing sense of pride, not in himself, but in Lucas. His son's brilliance and vision were undeniable, and James was determined to ensure that vision became a reality. By the end of the meeting, even the most stubborn board members were beginning to come around. James had won them over with a combination of hard facts and the sheer force of his conviction. As the room cleared, Thomas, James's longtime assistant, approached him. That was quite a performance, sir," Thomas said, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "I've never seen you fight so hard for a project before. If I didn't know better, I'd think this Lucas Mitchell was more than just another inventor to you." James hesitated, caught off guard by Thomas's perceptiveness. For a moment, he considered brushing off the comment, maintaining the professional distance he had always kept. But something inside him had shifted. The weight of his secrets, of his past mistakes, suddenly felt too heavy to bear alone. "Thomas," James said quietly, ensuring they were alone in the room, "what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Understood?" Thomas nodded, his curiosity piqued. "Lucas Mitchell, he's my son." The words hung in the air, heavy with years of secrecy and regret. Thomas's eyes widened in shock, but to his credit, he quickly composed himself. I see," Thomas said carefully. "And does Lucas know?" James nodded, a pained expression crossing his face. "He does now. I've only recently come back into his life. It's complicated." Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing this revelation. Then, to James's surprise, a small smile appeared on his face. "Well, sir, if you don't mind me saying, it's about time." James blinked, taken aback by Thomas's response. "What do you mean?" "Mr. Carter, I've worked for you for over 2 decades. I've seen you achieve incredible success, but I've also seen the toll it's taken on you. You've always seemed incomplete, somehow. Now I understand why." James felt a lump form in his throat, touched by Thomas's insight and apparent support. "Thank you, Thomas. I'm trying to make things right. I know it's late, probably too late, but I have to try." Thomas nodded, his expression serious. "It's never too late to try and fix our mistakes, sir. If there's anything I can do to help, just say the word." As James left the office that evening, he felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The board meeting had been a success. Lucas's project was safe, for now. But more than that, James felt like he had taken a step towards redemption. He had fought for his son, used his power and influence for something more important than just making money. On impulse, James pulled out his phone and dialed Lucas's number. The phone rang several times, and James felt his heart rate quicken with each unanswered ring. Just as he was about to hang up, Lucas's voice came through. "Hello? Lucas, it's James," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "No, it's fine. What's up?" James took a deep breath. "I wanted to let you know that I met with the board today. We discussed your project, and, well, it's been approved. They're going to move forward with it." The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, Lucas spoke, his voice a mix of surprise and cautious excitement. "Really? That's amazing. Thank you, James. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," James replied quickly. "This is your achievement, Lucas. Your brilliance, your vision. I just made sure they saw what I saw in your presentation." Another pause, this one filled with unspoken emotions. "Still," Lucas said finally, "I appreciate what you did. It means a lot." James felt a warmth spread through his chest at his son's words. "Lucas, I know we're still figuring things out between us, but I want you to know that I'm here. Whether it's about the project or anything else, I'm here." The vulnerability in James's voice was clear, and for a moment, Lucas felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crack. "Thank you," he said softly. I'll keep that in mind." As they ended the call, both father and son felt a shift in their fledgling relationship. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step in that direction, a willingness to try, to see where this newfound connection might lead. Later that night, as the city lights twinkled outside his penthouse window, James found himself looking at old photos, pictures of himself and Sophia in happier times, before ambition had torn them apart. He lingered on one photo in particular, taken at a college party. Sophia was laughing, her head thrown back in joy, while James looked at her with unmistakable love in his eyes. For the first time in years, James allowed himself to really feel the weight of what he had lost, the life he could have had, the family he had thrown away. Tears burned in his eyes as the full impact of his choices hit him. "I'm so sorry," he whispered to the smiling faces in the photo. "I'm so sorry." Across town, in his small apartment, Lucas sat at his desk, poring over the details of his project. The news of the board's approval had lit a fire under him, and he was determined to make the most of this opportunity. But as he worked, his mind kept drifting back to James. The man who had been absent for so long was now fighting for him, using his considerable influence to make Lucas's dreams a reality. It was a strange feeling, gratitude mixed with lingering resentment, hope tinged with fear of being hurt again. Lucas's eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk, himself and Sophia at his college graduation. His mother's proud smile, the love shining in her eyes, reminded him of all she had sacrificed to raise him alone. And yet, she had never spoken ill of James, never poisoned Lucas against the father he had never known. With a sigh, Lucas picked up his phone and opened his text conversation with James. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he debated what to say. Finally, he began to type. "James, I've been thinking about everything that's happened. I'm still processing it all, but I wanted to say thank you again for your help with the project. Maybe we could meet for coffee again soon. There's a lot more I'd like to know about you, about our family history. If you're up for it, Lucas." As he hit send, Lucas felt a mix of anxiety and cautious hope. He was taking a step into unknown territory, opening himself up to the possibility of a relationship with the father he had never known. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. In their respective homes, father and son stared out at the New York City skyline, each lost in thought about the past they shared and the future they might build. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential pitfalls and painful confrontations. But for the first time, there was also a glimmer of hope, a chance to heal old wounds and forge a new kind of family bond. As the night deepened, the city that never sleeps pulsed with life around them. In its vast tapestry of lives and stories, a new chapter was beginning, one of redemption, forgiveness, and the enduring power of family ties, no matter how long they've been stretched or broken. The bustling streets of New York City were alive with the morning rush as James Carter made his way to the small cafe where he was set to meet Lucas. His heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety, emotions he was still getting used to after years of maintaining a cool, business-like demeanor. As he approached the daily grind, he caught sight of Lucas through the window, already seated at a corner table, his eyes focused on a laptop screen. James paused for a moment, taking in the sight of his son. The resemblance between them was undeniable, from the set of their jaws to the intensity of their gazes. But where James saw calculation and strategy in his own reflection, he saw passion and idealism in Lucas. It was a stark reminder of the different paths their lives had taken. Taking a deep breath, James entered the cafe. The rich aroma of coffee and freshly baked pastries filled the air as he made his way to Lucas's table. Lucas looked up as he approached, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "James," he said, closing his laptop. "Thanks for meeting me." James nodded, settling into the chair across from his son. "Of course, thank you for the invitation. I'm glad you wanted to talk more." There was a moment of awkward silence as both men searched for the right words. It was Lucas who finally broke it, his voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and caution. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he began, his fingers idly tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "About you, about our family history. I realized there's so much I don't know. So many questions I've never had the chance to ask." James felt a surge of hope at Lucas's words. This was an opening, a chance to bridge the chasm between them. "I'm an open book, Lucas. Ask me anything you want to know." Lucas nodded, his brow furrowing slightly as he gathered his thoughts. "Tell me about your family. My grandparents, I guess. What were they like?" James leaned back in his chair, memories flooding back. "My father, your grandfather, was a hard-working man. He owned a small hardware store in Brooklyn. Honest to a fault, always preaching about the value of a day's work. My mother was a teacher, kind but stern. They were good people, but..." He trailed off, a hint of old pain creeping into his voice. Lucas leaned forward, intrigued. "But what?" James sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "But they struggled, financially. I mean, we were never poor, exactly poor, but there were always worries about money. I grew up watching my parents scrimp and save, always just one bad month away from real trouble. I think that's where my drive for success came from. I never wanted to feel that kind of uncertainty again." Lucas absorbed this information, seeing James in a new light. "So that's why you were so focused on your career, to escape that kind of life?" James nodded, a rueful smile on his face. "Partly, yes, but it became more than that. It became an obsession. I convinced myself that success and wealth were the only things that mattered. I thought I was doing the right thing, securing a better future. But in the process, I lost sight of what really mattered." The pain in James's voice was palpable, and Lucas found himself moved despite his lingering resentment. "What about Mom? How did you two meet?" A soft smile spread across James's face, his eyes distant with memory. "We met in college. I was this ambitious, driven business major, and she was studying environmental science. Complete opposites in many ways, but there was an instant connection." Lucas couldn't help but smile at the warmth in James's voice. "What was she like back then?" "Passionate," James replied without hesitation. "So passionate about her causes, about making the world a better place. She had this fire in her eyes when she talked about her dreams. It was intoxicating. She made me want to be a better person, to think beyond just making money." The wistfulness in James's tone was unmistakable, and Lucas felt a pang of sadness for what might have been. "What happened? Why did you leave?" James's expression darkened, shame evident in the set of his shoulders. "I got an offer, a chance to join a prestigious firm on the West Coast. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a fast track to everything I thought I wanted. Your mother, she begged me to stay, to choose our life together over my ambitions, but I was too blinded by the promise of success to see what I was throwing away." Lucas listened intently, his emotions a swirling mess of understanding and lingering hurt. "Did you ever regret it? Before you knew about me? I mean..." James was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on some distant point. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Every day. Even at the height of my success, there was always something missing, a hollow feeling I couldn't shake. I told myself it was just the drive to achieve more, to climb higher. But deep down, I knew I had made a terrible mistake." The vulnerability in James's admission struck a chord with Lucas. For the first time, he saw his father not as the successful businessman or the man who had abandoned them, but as a flawed human being capable of making mistakes and feeling remorse. "James," Lucas said softly, using his father's name still feeling strange on his tongue. "I appreciate your honesty. I can't pretend it makes everything okay, but it helps to understand." James nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I know I can never make up for the years I missed, Lucas, but I want you to know that I'm here now, not just to help with your project, but to be a part of your life in whatever way you'll allow. Lucas took a deep breath, weighing his next words carefully. "I'm not ready to call you Dad," he said finally. That's going to take time, but I think I'm ready to try and build some kind of relationship. To get to know you and to let you get to know me." The smile that spread across James's face was one of pure joy, an expression Lucas had never seen on the usually composed businessman. "That's more than I could have hoped for, Lucas. Thank you." As their conversation continued, flowing more easily now, neither man noticed the figure watching them from across the street. Sophia stood in the shadow of a building, her heart a tangle of emotions, as she observed the father and son she had once dreamed would be a family. She hadn't meant to spy on them. She had been on her way to a meeting when she spotted them through the cafe window. Now, she couldn't tear her eyes away from the sight of James and Lucas, engaged in what appeared to be a deep, meaningful conversation. Part of her rejoiced to see them connecting, to see the possibility of healing old wounds. But another part, a part she wasn't proud of, felt a twinge of jealousy and fear. For so long, it had been just her and Lucas against the world. What would this new dynamic mean for their relationship? Shaking off these thoughts, Sophia turned away from the cafe and continued on her way. She had always wanted Lucas to have a chance to know his father. Now that it was happening, she would need to navigate her own complex emotions about the situation. Back in the cafe, James and Lucas were discussing Lucas's project, their early attention giving way to shared enthusiasm. "The potential impact of this technology is enormous," James was saying, his eyes alight with excitement, not just environmentally, but economically. "It could revolutionize entire industries." Lucas nodded, his own passion evident in his animated gestures. "Exactly. That's what I've been trying to convince investors. It's not just about being green, it's about creating a sustainable future on all fronts." As they delved deeper into the technical aspects of the project, James found himself marveling at his son's knowledge and vision. There was so much of Sophia in him, the passion, the drive to make a difference. But there was something of James too, a strategic mind that could see the big picture and plan for contingencies. "Lucas," James said, a note of pride in his voice, "I want you to know how impressed I am, not just with the project, but with you. You've become an incredible young man, and that's all thanks to your mother's amazing job raising you." Lucas felt a warmth spread through his chest at James's words. It was strange, he thought, how much the approval of this man he barely knew meant to him. "Thank you," he said softly. "That means a lot." As their meeting drew to a close, both men felt a shift in their relationship. The walls of resentment and mistrust hadn't come down entirely, but there were cracks now, openings for understanding and connection to seep through. "I'd like to do this again," Lucas said, as they stood to leave. "Maybe next time you could tell me more about your side of the family. I've always wondered about that part of my history." James nodded, trying to contain his excitement at the prospect of future meetings. "I'd like that very much. And Lucas, if you ever want to visit the old neighborhood in Brooklyn, see where I grew up, I'd be honored to show you around." As they parted ways outside the cafe, James felt a lightness in his step that had been missing for years. He had a long way to go to earn his place in Lucas's life, but for the first time, he felt like it might be possible. Lucas, for his part, found himself looking at the city with new eyes as he made his way home. The towering skyscrapers and bustling streets seemed to hold new possibilities, new stories waiting to be uncovered. He had spent so long defining himself by his mother's side of the family and his own achievements. Now there was a whole other half of his history to explore. As the day wore on, three souls in the vast tapestry of New York City found themselves at a crossroads. James, emboldened by the progress with his son, determined to prove himself worthy of this second chance. Lucas, cautiously opening himself up to the possibility of a relationship with his father, while grappling with what this meant for his identity. And Sophia, watching from the sidelines, her heart full of love for her son, and a complex mix of emotions about the man she had once loved. The path ahead was far from clear, fraught with potential pitfalls and painful confrontations, but there was also hope. Hope for healing, for understanding, and for the forging of new bonds that could withstand the tests of time and past mistakes. As the sun began to set over the New York skyline, casting long shadows across the city streets, the stage was set for the next chapter in this unfolding family drama. The New York City skyline glittered in the late afternoon sun as Sophia Mitchell made her way through the bustling streets of Manhattan. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, still processing the sight of James and Lucas together at the cafe. As she approached her office building, a sleek high-rise housing some of the city's top environmental law firms, she tried to shake off the conflicting emotions that had been plaguing her all day. Sophia's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a message from Lucas. "Hey Mom, had another meeting with James today. It went well. Can we talk later? There's something I want to discuss with you." A mixture of pride and apprehension washed over her. She was glad Lucas was making progress with James, but a small part of her couldn't help but worry about what this meant for their own relationship. As she stepped into the elevator, Sophia's colleague and close friend, Rachel, joined her. "Sophia, there you are," Rachel exclaimed, her face etched with concern. "Have you heard the news?" Sophia frowned, her internal turmoil momentarily forgotten. "What news?" Rachel's eyes widened in surprise. "You haven't seen it. It's all over the environmental news sites. Green Tech Industries just announced a major breakthrough in sustainable energy technology. They're claiming it could make other green energy projects obsolete." Sophia felt her heart drop. Green Tech Industries was one of the largest and most influential companies in the sustainable energy sector. If their claims were true, it could have serious implications for Lucas's project. "No, I hadn't heard," Sophia replied, her mind racing. "Do you have any details?" Rachel shook her head. "Not much beyond the press release, but they're holding a big press conference tomorrow to reveal more. It's got everyone talking." As they exited the elevator, Sophia's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from James. "Sophia, we need to talk. It's about Lucas's project. Can you meet me at my office in an hour?" Sophia stared at the message, a sense of foreboding settling over her. Whatever was happening, it was clear that Lucas's path forward had just become much more complicated. "Rachel, I'm sorry, but I need to reschedule our meeting," Sophia said, already turning back towards the elevator. "Something's come up with Lucas." Rachel nodded understandingly. "Of course. Let me know if you need anything." An hour later, Sophia found herself stepping into the imposing lobby of Carter Enterprises. The sleek, modern interior was a far cry from the cozy law offices she was used to. As she was escorted to James's office on the top floor, Sophia couldn't help but feel a twinge of resentment. This was the world James had chosen over their family all those years ago. James was waiting for her, his usually composed face etched with worry. "Ah, Sophia, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "What's going on, James?" Sophia asked, cutting straight to the chase. "What's happened to Lucas's project?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Sophia's heart ache despite herself. "I assume you've heard about Green Tech's announcement." Sophia nodded, her jaw set. "Just the basics. But I'm guessing it's worse than it sounds." "I'm afraid so," James replied, his voice heavy. "I've got contacts in Green Tech, their new technology. It's revolutionary. If it performs as they claim, it could make Lucas's project obsolete before it even gets off the ground." Sophia felt a surge of protective anger. "But Lucas's work is brilliant. Surely there's still a place for it." James shook his head. "The market doesn't work that way, Sophia. You know that. If Green Tech's tech is as good as they say, investors will flock to it. Funding for competing projects will dry up overnight." Sophia stood up, pacing the large office. "So what do we do? We can't just let Lucas's dreams be crushed like this." James watched her, a familiar ache in his chest. Even after all these years, Sophia's fierce protectiveness of their son moved him deeply. "That's why I called you here. I have an idea. But you're not going to like it. Sophia turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. What is it? James took a deep breath. I want to buy out GreenTech's new technology, bring it under the Carter Enterprises umbrella. If we do that, we can integrate Lucas's work, make it part of a larger, more competitive project. Sophia stared at him, stunned. James, that would cost millions. James finished for her. Yes, I know, but I can do it. For Lucas. Sophia sank back into her chair, her mind reeling. And what would this mean for Lucas? For his role in the project? James leaned forward, his eyes intense. He would still be at the forefront. His ideas, his vision, they would be central to the project, but he'd have the backing of Carter Enterprises, the resources to really make it happen. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. And what about your board? Would they approve such a massive expenditure? A small smile played at the corners of James's mouth. Let me worry about the board. I can be very persuasive when I need to be. Sophia couldn't help but return the smile, remembering the charismatic young man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. But then her expression turned serious again. James, it's an incredibly generous offer. But have you thought about what this will do to your relationship with Lucas? He's only just starting to trust you. If you swoop in and basically take over his project. James nodded, his face grave. I know, it's a risk. But Sophia, if we don't do something, Lucas's project will be dead in the water. At least this way, his work has a chance to make a real impact. Sophia stood up again, moving to the large window that overlooked the city. The sun was setting now, casting a golden glow over the urban landscape. Somewhere out there, her son was probably still riding the high of his earlier meeting with James, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. We need to tell him, Sophia said finally, turning back to James. Together. He needs to hear this from both of us. James nodded, relief evident on his face. Agreed. Can you ask him to come to my office tomorrow morning? We can break the news about GreenTech and present my proposal. As Sophia left James's office, her emotions were in turmoil. Part of her was grateful for James's willingness to go to such lengths for Lucas. But another part couldn't help but worry about the complications this would bring to their already fragile family dynamic. She pulled out her phone and dialed Lucas's number. When he answered, she tried to keep her voice steady. Hey, sweetheart, about that talk you wanted to have, how about we do it over breakfast tomorrow? There's something important we need to discuss with you. The next morning, Lucas arrived at Carter Enterprises, a mixture of excitement and nervousness coursing through him. The message from his mother had been cryptic, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. As he was escorted to James's office, Lucas tried to prepare himself for whatever news awaited him. But nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him when he entered the room. James and Sophia were both there, sitting side by side on a plush leather couch. The sight of his parents together, in this setting, was so surreal that Lucas momentarily forgot to breathe. Lucas, Sophia said, standing to greet him with a hug, thank you for coming. We have something important to discuss with you. As Lucas took a seat across from his parents, James began to explain the situation with GreenTech. With each word, Lucas felt his dreams slipping away. The project he had poured his heart and soul into, the vision he had fought so hard for, was on the brink of becoming obsolete. But then James presented his proposal. As he outlined his plan to buy out GreenTech's technology and integrate Lucas's work, Lucas felt a whirlwind of emotions. Shock at the scale of what James was proposing, gratitude for his willingness to go to such lengths, and a nagging sense of unease about what this would mean for his own role in the project. I don't know what to say, Lucas finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. It's incredible, James, but it's also terrifying. What if I'm not ready for something this big? Sophia reached out, taking her son's hand. Lucas, sweetheart, you are more than ready. Your work is brilliant, and with the right resources behind it, it could change the world." James nodded in agreement. "She's right, Lucas. I've seen what you can do. This isn't about me taking over your project. It's about giving you the platform you need to really make a difference." Lucas looked between his parents, feeling the weight of their combined support. It was a strange feeling, having them both there, united in their desire to help him succeed. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it might have been like if things had been different, if they had been a family all along. But then reality came crashing back. This wasn't a fairy tale reunion. It was a business proposal, albeit one with deeply personal implications. "I need time to think about this," Lucas said finally. "It's a lot to process." James and Sophia exchanged a glance, then nodded. "Of course," James said. "Take all the time you need, but Lucas, we don't have much time before Green Tech goes public with their technology. We need to move fast if we're going to stay ahead of this." As Lucas left the office, his mind was spinning. He had come here expecting a simple breakfast meeting, and instead, his entire world had been turned upside down. Again, outside, the busy streets of New York seemed oblivious to the drama unfolding in the lives of the Carter Mitchell family. But for Lucas, Sophia, and James, the decisions made in the coming days would shape not just the future of their professional lives, but the very nature of their relationships with each other. The stage was set for a crucial turning point in their journey. Would Lucas accept James's offer, allowing his estranged father to become intimately involved in his professional life? How would this decision impact his relationship with Sophia, who had been his rock for so many years? And for James, was this truly about helping his son, or was it an attempt to buy his way back into a family he had abandoned? As the sun climbed higher in the New York sky, these questions hung in the air, waiting to be answered. The path forward was unclear, fraught with potential pitfalls and unexpected twists. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same for the Carter Mitchell family again. The bustling streets of New York City seemed to pulse with an energy that matched Lucas's racing thoughts as he left the imposing Carter Enterprises building. The weight of James's proposal hung heavy on his shoulders, a mix of opportunity and uncertainty that threatened to overwhelm him. He found himself wandering aimlessly, his feet carrying him through the concrete canyons of Manhattan as his mind grappled with the decision before him. As he walked, Lucas's phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket, messages from his mother, from James, from colleagues eager to discuss the Green Tech announcement. But Lucas ignored them all, needing time and space to process the bombshell that had been dropped on him. Without realizing it, Lucas found himself in Central Park, the lush greenery a stark contrast to the steel and glass jungle he had just left behind. He found a quiet bench near the lake and sat down, watching the ripples on the water's surface as he tried to sort through his tumultuous emotions. On one hand, James's offer was a lifeline. The resources of Carter Enterprises could catapult his project to heights he had only dreamed of. It was a chance to make a real, tangible difference in the world of sustainable energy. The scientist in him thrilled at the possibilities, the potential breakthroughs that could be achieved with such backing. But on the other hand, accepting James's help felt like a betrayal of sorts. For years, it had been just him and his mother against the world. Sophia had sacrificed so much to raise him, to support his dreams, and now, here was James, swooping in with his millions, offering to solve all their problems with the stroke of a pen. Lucas pulled out his phone, staring at the blank screen for a moment before opening his contacts. His thumb hovered over Sophia's name, but at the last second, he scrolled past it, landing on a different number. Taking a deep breath, he hit the call button. "Lucas," Emma's voice came through, a mix of surprise and concern. "Is everything okay?" Emma had been Lucas's best friend since college, a brilliant engineer in her own right who had been there for every up and down of his career. If anyone could offer an unbiased perspective on his situation, it was her. I need your advice," Lucas said, his voice shaky. Can you meet me? I'm in Central Park, by the lake." 20 minutes later, Emma arrived, her curly hair windswept and her eyes full of worry. She sat down next to Lucas, nudging his shoulder gently. "All right? Spill? What's going on?" Lucas took a deep breath and began to explain everything. James's reappearance in his life, the green tech announcement, and the proposal that now lay before him. Emma listened intently, her brow furrowing as she absorbed the complexity of the situation. "Wow," she said when Lucas finally finished. That's a lot, Luke. How are you feeling about all this?" Lucas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to jump at this chance. It's an incredible opportunity, but another part is worried about what it means for your relationship with your mum and with James." Emma finished for him. Lucas nodded, grateful for her understanding. "Exactly. I mean, I've only just started to get to know James. What if working together ruins whatever progress we've made? And my mum, she's always been my biggest supporter. I don't want her to feel like I'm choosing James over her." Emma was quiet for a moment, her gaze thoughtful as she watched a pair of ducks glide across the lake. "Lucas," she said finally, "I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. Sometimes in life, we're presented with opportunities that scare us because they have the potential to change everything. The question you need to ask yourself is, will you regret it more if you take this chance and it doesn't work out, or if you don't take it at all?" Lucas absorbed her words, feeling some of the tension leave his body. Emma had always had a knack for cutting through his overthinking and getting to the heart of the matter. "You're right," he said softly. "I need to think about the bigger picture here. This isn't just about me and my family drama. It's about the potential impact this project could have." Emma smiled, giving his shoulder a squeeze. "Exactly. And for what it's worth, I think you're strong enough to handle whatever complications come with this. You've never backed down from a challenge before. Why start now?" As Emma's words sank in, Lucas felt a newfound clarity settling over him. He knew what he had to do. "Thanks, Em," he said, pulling her into a quick hug. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Emma laughed, her eyes twinkling. "Probably make a mess of things. Now go on, go make your world-changing decision. And remember, no matter what happens, you've got people in your corner." With a renewed sense of purpose, Lucas made his way back through the park, his strides purposeful as he headed towards Carter Enterprises. The city seemed different now, full of possibility rather than daunting uncertainty. As he approached the towering building, Lucas took a moment to steel himself. He knew that the decision he was about to make would change the course of his life, both personally and professionally. But he also knew that some opportunities were too important to pass up, no matter how complicated they might be. The elevator ride to James's office felt both endless and far too short. When the doors opened, Lucas was surprised to find both James and Sophia waiting for him. They stood as he entered, their faces a mix of hope and apprehension. "Lucas," Sophia said, moving towards him, "we didn't expect you back so soon. Are you okay?" Lucas nodded, his gaze moving between his parents. It was still strange to see them together like this, a visual representation of his past and present colliding. "I've made my decision," he said, his voice steady. "I want to do it. I want to work with Carter Enterprises to integrate my project with the green tech technology." The relief on James's face was palpable, while Sophia's expression was a complex mix of pride and something Lucas couldn't quite decipher. Was it worry? "That's wonderful news, Lucas," James said, stepping forward. "I promise you won't regret this. We're going to do great things together." Lucas held up a hand, stopping James mid-stride. "I have conditions," he said firmly. First, I want to maintain creative control over the integration of my work. I won't be sidelined or treated like a junior employee." James nodded quickly. "Of course, this is your vision, Lucas. We're here to support and amplify it, not take it over." "Second," Lucas continued, his gaze shifting to Sophia, "Mum, I want you involved too." Your expertise in environmental law will be crucial as we navigate the legal and regulatory aspects of this project." Sophia's eyes widened in surprise. "Lucas, are you sure? This is your project, your moment." Lucas smiled, reaching out to take her hand. "It's always been our project, Mom. I wouldn't be here without you. I want you by my side for this." Sophia squeezed his hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "And then I'm honored to be part of it." Finally, Lucas turned back to James. "Last condition. This partnership, it's professional. It doesn't automatically fix our personal relationship. We'll continue to work on that separately at our own pace." "Agreed," James nodded solemnly. "Absolutely. I'm here to support you in whatever way you need, Lucas, both professionally and personally, on your terms." As the three of them stood there, the weight of the moment settled over them. This wasn't just a business deal, it was a new chapter in their complex family story. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with potential pitfalls and unexpected twists. But there was also hope. Hope for healing, for success, and for a future none of them could have imagined just a few weeks ago. "Well," Lucas said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "I guess we have work to do." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. James called an emergency board meeting to present the plan, while Sophia began reaching out to her contacts in the environmental law community. Lucas found himself in a state-of-the-art lab within Carter Enterprises, poring over the technical specifications of the green tech technology. As the day wore on, Lucas couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement building within him. This was it. The chance he had been waiting for to make a real difference in the world of sustainable energy. And despite the complicated emotions surrounding his newfound relationship with James, he couldn't deny the thrill of working alongside someone with such vast experience and resources. Late that evening, as the New York City skyline twinkled outside the windows of James's office, the three of them sat together, reviewing the progress they had made. The atmosphere was charged with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "I think we've made a good start," James said, leaning back in his chair. "The board is cautiously optimistic about the merger, and our legal team is already working on the acquisition of green tech's technology." Sophia nodded, her eyes bright with excitement despite the late hour. "And I've got meetings set up with some key players in the regulatory field. We're going to need their support to fast-track some of these innovations." Lucas looked between them, a warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time, he could see the potential of what they could achieve together. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about forging a new kind of relationship, one built on mutual respect and shared goals. "I have to admit," Lucas said, a hint of wonder in his voice, "this is not how I expected my week to go when I woke up this morning." James chuckled, shaking his head. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? I never thought I'd have the chance to work with my brilliant son on a project that could change the world." The word son hung in the air for a moment, its weight palpable. But instead of the tension Lucas might have expected, he felt a strange sense of rightness. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step in that direction. As they prepared to call it a night, Sophia pulled Lucas aside. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice low. "And it's not too late to change your mind if you're having second thoughts." Lucas smiled, pulling his mother into a hug. "I'm sure, Mom. It's going to be complicated and probably messy at times, but I think this is the right path. And having you here makes it all feel right, somehow." Sophia held him tight, her heart full of love and pride for the man her son had become. "I'm so proud of you, Lucas. Just remember, no matter what happens with this project or with James, you'll always have me. Always." As they left the office, stepping out into the warm New York night, Lucas felt a sense of anticipation for what lay ahead. The path forward was uncertain, filled with potential obstacles and challenges, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The city stretched out before them, a vast tapestry of lights and possibilities, And somewhere in that urban jungle, the future of sustainable energy and the future of the Carter-Mitchell family was waiting to be written. It was a future that held the promise of innovation, reconciliation, and perhaps, in time, the healing of old wounds. As Lucas hailed a cab, he caught sight of his reflection in a nearby window. The man staring back at him looked different somehow, older, more confident, ready to take on the world. With a small smile, Lucas realized that this was just the beginning of his journey. The real adventure was about to begin. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of New York City as Lucas made his way to Carter Enterprises. It had been 2 weeks since he had agreed to work with James on integrating his project with the green tech technology, and the days had been a whirlwind of activity. Lucas felt a mix of excitement and trepidation as he approached the towering glass building that now represented both his professional future and his complicated family history. As he stepped into the elevator, Lucas caught his reflection in the mirrored walls. He looked different somehow, more confident, more determined. The past 2 weeks had been challenging, but they had also been exhilarating. Working alongside James, seeing the vast resources and expertise at their disposal, had opened Lucas's eyes to the true potential of his project. The elevator doors opened, revealing the sleek, modern office space that had become his second home. Lucas made his way to the large conference room where he, James, and Sophia had been holding their daily strategy meetings. As he approached, he could hear raised voices coming from inside. Frowning, Lucas quickened his pace. He pushed open the door to find James and Sophia in the middle of what appeared to be a heated argument. They both fell silent as Lucas entered, their faces a mix of frustration and concern. "Dick, what's going on?" Lucas asked, looking between his parents. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Lucas had come to recognize as a sign of stress. "We've hit a snag," he said, his voice tight. "The green tech acquisition. It's not going as smoothly as we hoped." Sophia nodded, her expression grim. "It seems green tech got wind of our plans. They're playing hardball, threatening to go public with their technology before we can finalize the deal." Lucas felt his heart sink. The entire project hinged on acquiring green tech's breakthrough technology. Without it, they would be back at square one, Dick, with Lucas's work in danger of becoming obsolete before it even had a chance to make an impact. "What are our options?" Lucas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. James sighed, collapsing into one of the plush conference room chairs. "We could try to outbid them, offer more money to speed up the acquisition, but that would put a serious strain on our resources, potentially jeopardizing other aspects of the project." Sophia leaned against the conference table, her brow furrowed in thought. "Or we could try to negotiate, see if we can find a compromise that works for both parties. But that would take time we might not have if green tech is serious about going public." Lucas listened to their options, his mind racing. This was the kind of high-stakes business maneuvering he had never had to deal with before. For a moment, he felt overwhelmed, out of his depth in this world of corporate chess. But then, a memory surfaced. A late-night conversation with Emma, his best friend and fellow engineer. They had been discussing theoretical applications of Lucas's technology, pushing the boundaries of what they thought was possible. At the time, it had seemed like a fun intellectual exercise. Now, it might be the key to saving their project. "Wait!" Lucas said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "What if we don't need green tech's technology at all?" James and Sophia turned to him, identical expressions of confusion on their faces. "And what do you mean?" James asked. Lucas took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. "Green tech's breakthrough is in energy storage, right? That's what makes their technology so revolutionary. But what if we could achieve the same results, or even better, using a completely different approach?" He moved to the whiteboard that dominated one wall of the conference room, picking up a marker. As he began to sketch out diagrams and equations, Lucas felt a familiar excitement building in his chest. This was what he lived for, the thrill of innovation, of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. I'd see, if we combine the principles of quantum entanglement with my work on sustainable energy generation, we might be able to create a system that doesn't just store energy more efficiently, but actually generates it in a way that's completely sustainable and scalable. James and Sophia watched in amazement as Lucas outlined his idea. It was bold, innovative, and potentially game-changing, but it was also highly theoretical, with no guarantee of success. Lucas, Sophia said carefully, this is brilliant, but can we really pivot the entire project based on an untested theory? James nodded in agreement. The board is already nervous about the green tech situation. If we tell them we're abandoning that acquisition to pursue an unproven technology, Lucas turned to face them, his eyes blazing with determination. I know it's a risk, but isn't that what innovation is all about? Taking risks, pushing boundaries. This could be so much bigger than just acquiring green tech's technology. We could create something entirely new, something that could revolutionize the entire field of sustainable energy. There was a moment of silence as James and Sophia absorbed Lucas's words. Then, slowly, a smile spread across James's face. You know, he said, a hint of pride in his voice. You remind me of myself at your age. Always pushing for the big ideas, the game changers. Sophia shot James a look, a mix of exasperation and fondness. That's what worries me, she said, but there was a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Lucas looked between them, feeling a strange sense of connection. For the first time, he could see echoes of himself in both of his parents. Sophia's passion for making a difference, James's drive to think big and take risks. So, Lucas said, his heart racing, what do you think? Are we ready to take this leap? James stood up, moving to stand beside Lucas at the whiteboard. He studied the equations and diagrams, his expression thoughtful. It's risky, he said finally, but I've built my entire career on taking calculated risks. If you truly believe in this, Lucas, then I'm with you. Sophia joined them, her eyes scanning the complex formulas. From a legal standpoint, this could actually work in our favor. If we're developing entirely new technology, we won't be bound by the same regulatory hurdles we would have faced with the green tech acquisition. Lucas felt a surge of excitement and gratitude. So we're doing this. We're really going to try. James nodded, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. We're doing this, but we need to move fast. We'll need to reassure the board, reallocate resources, bring in new experts. And we'll need to keep this under wraps, Sophia added. If word gets out about what we're working on, we could face serious competition or attempts to undermine our work. Lucas nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a scientific endeavor anymore. It was a high-stakes game with potentially world-changing consequences. As they began to outline their new strategy, Lucas felt a mix of exhilaration and trepidation. He was about to embark on the most challenging and important work of his life, with his once estranged father and his devoted mother by his side. It was a scenario he never could have imagined just a few weeks ago. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. James called an emergency board meeting to present their new direction, using all of his considerable charm and business acumen to win over the skeptical executives. Sophia began the complex process of reorienting their legal strategy, working to protect their new intellectual property while navigating the murky waters of energy regulation. And Lucas threw himself into the work with a passion he had never felt before. He assembled a team of the brightest minds from Carter Enterprises, explaining his vision and coordinating their efforts. As the sun began to set over the New York skyline, Lucas found himself standing in a state-of-the-art lab, surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations and diagrams. He was so engrossed in his work that he didn't notice James enter the lab until his father spoke. "You know," James said softly, "I always dreamed of moments like this, working side by side with my son, taking on the world together." Lucas turned, surprised by the vulnerability in James's voice. "Really? Even when you were gone?" James finished, a hint of sadness in his eyes, especially then. I told myself that someday, when I had achieved enough success, I would come back and be the father you deserved. But I realize now how foolish that was. I missed so much, hurt so many people. Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. It was still strange to see this side of James, not the confident businessman, but a man grappling with regret and trying to make amends. "We can't change the past," Lucas said finally, "but maybe we can build something new. Together." James nodded, blinking back tears. "I'd like that, Lucas. More than you know." As they stood there in the quiet lab, surrounded by the fruits of their shared passion for innovation, Lucas felt a shift in his relationship with James. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step towards understanding, towards building the kind of father-son bond he had always longed for. The moment was interrupted by Sophia's arrival. She took in the scene before her, James and Lucas standing side by side, surrounded by the evidence of their shared brilliance, and felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in her son, cautious hope for the future, and a lingering ache for what might have been. "The board's on board," she announced, her voice cutting through the emotional tension. "We've got the green light to proceed with the new direction." Lucas and James exchanged a look of excitement and determination. This was it. The real work was about to begin. As the three of them left the lab that night, stepping out into the warm New York evening, Lucas felt a sense of anticipation, unlike anything he had experienced before. They were embarking on a journey that could change the world, fraught with challenges and potential pitfalls. But for the first time, he felt like he had a true team behind him, a brilliant, complicated, determined family ready to take on whatever obstacles lay ahead. The city stretched out before them, a glittering tapestry of lights and possibilities. And somewhere in that urban jungle, the future of sustainable energy and the future of the Carter-Mitchell family was waiting to be written. It was a future that held the promise of innovation, reconciliation, and perhaps, in time, the healing of old wounds. As they parted ways for the night, each heading to their respective homes, Lucas couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. The real challenges, the true tests of their newfound family bond and their innovative vision were yet to come. But for now, he allowed himself to bask in the glow of possibility, ready to face whatever the dawn might bring. The New York City skyline glowed in the early morning light as Lucas made his way to Carter Enterprises. It had been a month since they had pivoted their Project E, abandoning the green tech acquisition in favor of Lucas's groundbreaking idea. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of activity, filled with long days and even longer nights as they raced to turn theory into reality. As Lucas entered the building, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The lobby was buzzing with energy, people hurrying to and fro with a sense of purpose. It was a far cry from the small startup he had been running just a few months ago. Now, he was at the heart of one of the biggest and most innovative projects in the sustainable energy sector. The elevator ride to the top floor seemed to take longer than usual, giving Lucas time to reflect on the changes in his life. Working alongside James had been complicated. There were moments of brilliant collaboration where Lucas could see the potential of what they could achieve together. But there were also times of tension, old wounds threatening to reopen as they navigated their newfound professional relationship. And then there was Sophia. His mother had thrown herself into the legal aspects of the project with a passion that both impressed and worried Lucas. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was pushing herself too hard, trying to prove her worth in this new family dynamic. As the elevator doors opened, Lucas was surprised to see Thomas, James's longtime assistant, waiting for him. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," Thomas said, his usually impassive face showing a hint of concern. "Mr. Carter asked me to escort you to his office as soon as you arrived. There's been a development." Lucas felt a knot form in his stomach. In the world of high-stakes business and cutting-edge technology, a development rarely meant good news. He followed Thomas down the hallway, his mind racing with possibilities. When they reached James's office, Lucas was surprised to find not just James, but also Sophia and several members of the board already gathered. The tension in the room was palpable. "Lucas," James said, his voice tight with stress, "thank you for coming so quickly. We have a situation." Sophia moved to Lucas's side, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "It's about the project, sweetheart." "There's been a leak." Lucas felt his heart drop. "A leak? What kind of leak?" One of the board members, an older man named Harrison, spoke up. "Someone has been feeding information about our new direction to green tech. They know about your theoretical work on quantum entanglement and sustainable energy generation." The room seemed to spin around Lucas. This was a nightmare scenario. If green tech got their hands on the specifics of their research, they could potentially beat them to the punch, rendering all their work useless. "How?" Lucas managed to ask. "How could this happen?" James shook his head, frustration evident in every line of his face. "We don't know. We've implemented every security measure possible, but somehow, information is still getting out." Sophia squeezed Lucas's arm gently. "We have our cybersecurity team working around the clock to trace the leak, but in the meantime, we need to decide how to proceed." Lucas looked around the room, taking in the grim faces of the board members. "What are our options?" Harrison cleared his throat. "Some of us believe we should cut our losses, go back to the original plan of acquiring green tech, even if it means paying a premium." Lucas felt a surge of anger. "No, absolutely not. We can't give up now, not when we're so close to a breakthrough." James nodded in agreement. "I'm with Lucas. We've come too far to back down now, but we need to find this leak, and fast." As the discussion continued, Lucas found his mind wandering. Who could be behind this? Who had access to enough information to pose a real threat? And more importantly, why would someone within Carter Enterprises want to sabotage their own project? Suddenly, a thought struck him. "Wait," he said, interrupting the ongoing debate. What if the leak isn't coming from inside Carter Enterprises at all?" All eyes turned to Lucas. James leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What do you mean?" Lucas took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. "Think about it. We've been so focused on internal security, but what if the leak is coming from one of our external partners? The labs we've been working with, the suppliers," Sophia's eyes widened in realization, "or the legal firms we've been consulting with on the regulatory aspects?" James stood up, pacing the room as he considered this new angle. "It's possible. We've had to bring in a lot of outside expertise for this project. Any one of them could be the weak link." Harrison frowned. "But how do we investigate without tipping our hand? If we start questioning all our partners, word will get out that we're onto the leak." Lucas felt a surge of determination. This was his project, his vision. He wasn't about to let it be derailed by corporate espionage. "We don't question them directly. We feed them false information, different stories to different partners. See which version ends up in green tech's hands." There was a moment of silence as everyone absorbed Lucas's suggestion. Then, slowly, James began to smile. "It's risky," he said, "but it just might work. Lucas, I think you might have a future in corporate strategy." As the meeting broke up, with board members hurrying off to implement the new plan, Lucas found himself alone with James and Sophia. The three of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation hanging heavy in the air. "I'm sorry," James said finally, his voice soft. "I never wanted to drag you into this kind of corporate warfare, Lucas. This isn't what science is supposed to be about." Lucas shook his head. "No, it's not. But if we want to make a real difference, to create something that can change the world, this is the game we have to play. I'm ready for it." Sophia looked between them, a mix of pride and concern on her face. "Just be careful. Both of you. This world, it can change people. Don't lose sight of why we started this in the first place." As they left the office, heading to their respective tasks, Lucas couldn't shake a feeling of unease. They were entering dangerous territory, playing a high-stakes game with potentially global consequences, and somewhere out there, someone was working against them, trying to steal or sabotage the work that had become his life's passion. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Lucas threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, pushing the boundaries of his theories, while also helping to craft the false information they would use to smoke out the leak. It was exhausting, exhilarating work that left him little time to dwell on the personal complications of working so closely with James and Sophia. But late one night, as Lucas was burning the midnight oil in the lab, he received an unexpected visitor. Emma, his best friend from college, walked in, a look of concern on her face. "Lucas Mitchell," she said, her voice a mix of affection and exasperation. "When was the last time you saw the outside world?" Lucas blinked, realizing he had lost track of time. "Emma, what are you doing here?" She held up a bag of takeout. "Feeding you, apparently, and making sure you haven't completely lost yourself in this project." As they sat together, sharing Chinese food and catching up, Lucas felt some of the tension of the past weeks begin to ease. Emma had always had that effect on him, grounding him when he got too caught up in his work. "So," Emma said, fixing Lucas with a penetrating look, "how are things really going? And I don't mean the project. I mean with you, with your family." Lucas sighed, pushing his food around with his chopsticks. "It's complicated. Working with James, it's like a roller coaster. One minute we're in sync, finishing each other's sentences, and the next, it's like we're speaking different languages." Emma nodded sympathetically. "And your mom? She's amazing, as always, but I can tell she's struggling too. It's a lot, having us all working together like this. I think she's worried about getting hurt again." Emma was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "Lucas, I know this project means everything to you, but don't forget to take care of yourself and your relationships. Success won't mean much if you lose yourself along the way." Lucas nodded, grateful for Emma's perspective. As she left, promising to drag him out for a proper meal soon, Lucas found himself reflecting on the past few months. He had gained so much, a chance to work on groundbreaking technology, a relationship with the father he never knew, but at what cost? As he turned back to his work, Lucas made a silent promise to himself. He would see this project through, would fight to make his vision a reality, but he wouldn't let it consume him. He owed it to himself, to his mother, and even to James, to find a balance between his professional ambitions and his personal life. Little did Lucas know, as he bent over his equations late into the night, that the real challenges were yet to come. The hunt for the leak was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test not just his scientific acumen, but the very foundations of his newfound family bonds. Across town, in a dimly lit office, a figure hunched over a computer, poring over the latest stolen data from Carter Enterprises. A phone rang, breaking the silence. "Yes," the figure answered. "We need more," a distorted voice demanded. "Whatever they're working on, it's big. We need everything you can get." The figure sighed, a hint of reluctance in their voice. "I'll do what I can, but I'm telling you, they're getting suspicious. This might be the last batch I can get safely. Just get it done." The voice snapped before the line went dead. The figure sat back, conflict evident on their face. They were in too deep now, caught between loyalty and ambition, between the promise of reward and the threat of discovery. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, they made a decision. One last job, one final betrayal, and then they would be out for good. Little did they know that their actions were about to set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of Carter Enterprises, test the limits of family loyalty, and potentially change the course of sustainable energy research forever. As the sun rose over New York City, casting long shadows across the urban landscape, the stage was set for a confrontation that would push Lucas, James, and Sophia to their limits, forcing them to confront not just external threats, but the ghosts of their shared past and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The New York City skyline sparkled in the late afternoon sun as Lucas Mitchell stood at the window of his office at Carter Enterprises. His reflection stared back at him, a young man with tired eyes and a furrowed brow. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of activity, filled with breakthroughs and setbacks as they raced to develop their groundbreaking, sustainable energy technology while simultaneously trying to smoke out the source of the information leak. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Lucas called. Turning from the window, James entered, his face a mask of concern. "Lucas, we need to talk. The results from our false information strategy are in." Lucas felt his heart rate quicken. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the chance to finally identify the mole in their organization. "What did we find?" James sighed heavily, sinking into one of the chairs in front of Lucas's desk. "It's complicated. The leak isn't coming from where we thought it was. It's not one of our external partners." Lucas frowned, moving to sit behind his desk. "Then where?" "One of the board members." James shook his head, his expression grim. "No, Lucas, the leaked information. It's coming from this floor, from someone with high-level access to our most sensitive data." The implications of James's words hit Lucas like a physical blow. This floor housed only the most senior members of the project team, including himself, James, and Sophia. That's impossible. Everyone here has been vetted, has a stake in the project's success. Why would any of them betray us? James leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "I don't know, but we need to tread carefully. Whoever is behind this is smart, connected, and potentially very dangerous. We can't risk tipping them off that we're onto them." Lucas nodded, his mind racing. "What's our next move?" "We need to set a trap," James replied. "Feed false information to a select few individuals, each with a unique piece of data. When that data inevitably reaches Green Tech, we'll know exactly who the mole is." As they discussed the details of their plan, Lucas couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The idea that someone so close to the project, someone they worked with every day, could be betraying them was almost unfathomable, and yet the evidence was undeniable. Later that evening, as Lucas was preparing to leave for the day, he received a text from Sophia asking him to meet her at a small cafe a few blocks from the office. Curious and a bit concerned, Lucas made his way through the busy New York streets, his mind still churning with the implications of the day's revelations. He found Sophia seated at a corner table, her face etched with worry. As Lucas sat down across from her, he could see the toll the past few weeks had taken on his mother. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her usual air of calm determination had been replaced by a nervous energy. "Mom," Lucas said softly, reaching out to take her hand. "What's going on? Are you okay?" Sophia squeezed his hand, her eyes darting around the cafe as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Lucas, I think I know who the leak is." Lucas felt his breath catch in his throat. "What? How?" Sophia leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been doing some digging of my own, looking into financial records, communications logs, and I found something troubling." She pulled out her tablet, quickly navigating to a series of documents. "Look at these transfers, large sums of money, moving through a series of shell companies, all leading back to one person on our team." Lucas studied the documents, his heart sinking as he realized the implications. The name at the end of the paper trail was one he knew well, someone he had come to trust and respect over the past few months. "This can't be right," he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "There has to be some other explanation." Sophia's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I wish there was, sweetheart, but the evidence is pretty damning. We need to take this to James, decide how to proceed." As they left the cafe, neither of them noticed the figure watching from across the street, hidden in the shadows of a nearby alley. The observer pulled out a phone, quickly dialing a number. "Do they know?" the figure said tersely. "Or at least, they suspect. We need to accelerate the timeline." Back at Carter Enterprises, James was working late, poring over the latest test results from their prototype. The breakthrough they had been hoping for was tantalizingly close, but there were still significant hurdles to overcome. A soft knock on his office door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting it to be one of the night shift engineers. Instead, it was Thomas, his longtime assistant. The older man's face was drawn, his usual composure replaced by an air of nervous agitation. "Thomas," James said, standing up in concern. "What is it? What's wrong?" Thomas closed the door behind him, his hands shaking slightly. "Mr. Carter, James, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." James felt a chill run down his spine. He had known Thomas for years, had trusted him with the most sensitive aspects of his business and personal life. "Thomas, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Thomas took a deep breath, seeming to steel himself. "It's about the leak. I know who's behind it because I've been helping them." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as James absorbed Thomas's words. "You? But why? How could you do this?" Thomas's face crumpled, years of guilt and stress etched in every line. It wasn't supposed to be like this. At first it was just small things, harmless information, but then they wanted more and more. I tried to stop, but they threatened my family. I didn't know what to do. James sank back into his chair, his mind reeling. "Who? Thomas? Who's behind this?" Before Thomas could answer, the office door burst open. Lucas and Sophia rushed in, their faces flushed with excitement and worry. "Dad!" Lucas exclaimed, then stopped short at the sight of Thomas. "Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't mean to interrupt." James looked between Thomas and his family, feeling as though he was standing on the edge of a precipice. "It's all right," he said slowly. "I think we all need to hear what Thomas has to say." As Thomas began to explain, haltingly at first and then with increasing urgency, the full scope of the conspiracy began to unfold. It wasn't just green tech behind the attacks on their project. There was a larger player involved, a shadowy conglomerate with ties to the fossil fuel industry that saw their sustainable energy breakthrough as a threat to their profits. "They have people everywhere," Thomas said, his voice shaking. "In green tech, in the regulatory agencies, even on our own board. They've been working to undermine us from the start." Lucas felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him. All their work, all their dreams of changing the world, and they had been fighting against an invisible enemy the entire time. Sophia, ever the pragmatist, was the first to recover. "We need to go to the authorities," she said firmly. "With Thomas's testimony and the evidence we've gathered, we can bring this whole operation down." James nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Thomas. "You're right, but we need to be careful. If this conspiracy is as far-reaching as Thomas says, we can't trust anyone outside this room." As they began to formulate a plan, Lucas found himself watching his parents. Despite the shock and betrayal they had just experienced, they were working together seamlessly, their years of separation seeming to melt away in the face of this crisis. For a moment, Lucas allowed himself to imagine what it might have been like if things had been different, if they had been a family all along. But he quickly pushed the thought aside. They couldn't change the past, but they could shape the future. And right now, that future was hanging in the balance. As the night wore on, the four of them worked tirelessly, compiling evidence, making contingency plans, and preparing for the fight of their lives. They knew that the coming days would be crucial, not just for their project, but for the future of sustainable energy and perhaps even the planet itself. Outside, the New York City night pulsed with its usual energy, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the offices of Carter Enterprises. But as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Lucas, James, Sophia, and Thomas stood united, ready to take on the forces that sought to destroy everything they had worked for. The stage was set for a final confrontation, one that would test not just their scientific and business acumen, but the strength of their newfound family bonds. As they prepared to leave the office and set their plan in motion, Lucas caught his reflection in the window once more. The tired, worried young man from the previous evening was gone, replaced by someone with a steely determination in his eyes. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles they would face, Lucas knew one thing for certain: they would face them together, as a family. And in that moment, despite the danger and uncertainty that surrounded them, he felt a glimmer of hope. They had come this far against all odds. Now, it was time to finish what they had started and change the world. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of New York City as Lucas, James, Sophia, and Thomas made their way out of Carter Enterprises. The weight of their newfound knowledge hung heavy on their shoulders, each step feeling like a move in a dangerous chess game they hadn't realized they were playing. Lucas glanced at his parents, noting the determined set of their jaws and the subtle way they positioned themselves protectively around him. It was a stark reminder of how much had changed in the past few months. Once estranged, they were now a united front, facing an invisible enemy that threatened not just their project, but their very lives. As they approached a nondescript cafe a few blocks from the office, James spoke in a low voice. "Remember, we can't trust anyone outside our immediate circle. From now on, we operate as if everyone is a potential threat." Sophia nodded, her eyes scanning the street for any signs of surveillance. "We need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks." They entered the cafe, choosing a secluded booth in the back. As they settled in, Thomas pulled out a small device and placed it on the table. Signal jammer," he explained at their questioning looks. "Just in case." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. The gravity of their situation was starting to sink in. This wasn't just corporate espionage anymore. They were up against a powerful organization willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their interests. "Okay," James said, leaning in close. "Let's go over the plan one more time. Thomas, you'll reach out to your contact, set up a meeting. We need to get as much information as we can about the extent of their operation." Thomas nodded, his face pale but resolute. "I'll tell them I have crucial information about the project's next phase. That should get their attention." Sophia pulled out her tablet, her fingers flying over the screen. "I've been compiling all the evidence we have, financial records, communication logs, everything. We need to get this to someone we can trust in the Justice Department." "What about me?" Lucas asked, feeling a mix of anticipation and fear. "What can I do?" James and Sophia exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. It was James who spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "Lucas, I know you want to be in the thick of things, but we need you to focus on the project. If we're going to beat them, we need that breakthrough. You're the only one who can make it happen." Lucas felt a surge of frustration. "But I can help. I'm not some kid you need to protect. I'm part of this too." Sophia reached out, taking his hand. "We know, sweetheart, and you are helping. Your work is the key to all of this. Without it, none of what we're doing matters." As they continued to discuss their strategy, Lucas found his mind wandering to the lab, to the equations and experiments that had consumed his life for the past months. They were so close to a breakthrough, he could feel it. But with everything that was happening, would they have enough time? Their planning session was interrupted by the arrival of their food. As they ate, maintaining a facade of normalcy for any watching eyes, Lucas couldn't help but marvel at the surreal nature of their situation. Here they were, casually eating breakfast while plotting to take down a massive conspiracy. As they prepared to leave, James pulled Lucas aside. "Son, I know this isn't easy, and I know you want to be more involved in the investigation, but I need you to understand something." Lucas looked at his father, noting the lines of worry etched on his face. "What is it?" James placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder, his eyes intense. "You are the most important part of all of this, not just because of your work on the project, but because you're my son. And I can't bear the thought of anything happening to you." The raw emotion in James's voice caught Lucas off guard. For a moment, he saw past the successful businessman, past the absent father, to the man underneath, a man trying desperately to protect his family and make amends for past mistakes. "I understand," Lucas said softly. "I'll do my part. Just be careful, okay, all of you?" As they left the cafe, splitting up to avoid arousing suspicion, Lucas felt a renewed sense of purpose. He may not be on the front lines of the investigation, but his work in the lab could be the key to bringing down the entire conspiracy. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Lucas threw himself into his research with renewed vigor, pushing the boundaries of what was possible in sustainable energy generation. The lab became his world, a place where he could focus solely on the science and forget, for a few hours at least, about the danger that lurked outside. It was late one evening, as Lucas was poring over some particularly challenging calculations, that he had a sudden epiphany. The solution he had been searching for, the key to making their technology not just viable but revolutionary, was right there in front of him. With trembling hands, Lucas began to input the new variables into their simulation program. As the results began to pour in, he felt his heart rate quicken. This was it. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Lucas reached for his phone, ready to share the news with James and Sophia, when a noise from the hallway caught his attention. It was well past midnight. No one else should be in the building. Cautiously, Lucas made his way to the lab door, peering out into the dimly lit corridor. At first, he saw nothing, but then a shadow moved, and Lucas felt his blood run cold. A figure was making its way towards the lab, moving with purpose. In the low light, Lucas couldn't make out any features, but one thing was clear: whoever it was, they weren't supposed to be there. Lucas's mind raced. Should he confront the intruder? Try to slip away unnoticed? Call security? As he weighed his options, the figure drew closer, and Lucas caught a glimpse of something metallic in their hand. In that moment, all thoughts of caution fled. Lucas slammed the lab door shut, engaging the emergency lock. His hands shaking, he pulled out his phone, dialing James's number. "Dad," he whispered as soon as James picked up. "Someone's here. In the building. I think they're armed." James's voice came through, sharp with alarm. "Lucas, listen to me carefully. Stay where you are. Don't open the door for anyone. I'm on my way." As Lucas ended the call, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the soft beep of the keypad outside the lab door. Whoever was out there had the access code. Panic rising in his throat. Lucas looked around the lab frantically. He needed to hide, to protect the breakthrough he had just made. As the door began to open, Lucas made a split-second decision. He grabbed his laptop, shoving it into his bag along with as many of his notes as he could gather. Then, with a silent prayer, he slipped into a large equipment cabinet in the corner of the lab. Through a small gap in the cabinet door, Lucas watched as the intruder entered the lab. The figure moved with purpose, heading straight for Lucas's workstation. As they began to rifle through the papers left on the desk, Lucas held his breath, praying that the pounding of his heart wouldn't give him away. Minutes that felt like hours passed as the intruder searched the lab. Lucas could hear them muttering in frustration, clearly not finding what they were looking for. Just when Lucas thought he couldn't stand the tension any longer, a commotion erupted in the hallway. "NYPD, freeze!" The shout was followed by the sound of running feet and a brief scuffle. Then, blessed silence. Lucas waited, his entire body tense, until he heard a familiar voice. "Lucas, Lucas, are you in here? It's safe to come out now." Cautiously, Lucas emerged from his hiding place to find James, Sophia, and several police officers in the lab. The relief on his parents' faces was palpable as they rushed to embrace him. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Sophia asked, her hands running over Lucas's face and arms as if checking for injuries. "I'm fine," Lucas assured her, his voice shaky. "I hid as soon as I realized someone was coming." What happened?" James's face was grim as he explained. We got lucky. The police were already on their way here when you called. It seems Thomas's meeting with his contact didn't go as planned. They figured out he was working with us and decided to take matters into their own hands. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. Thomas, is he? He's alive, Sophia said quickly. But he's in the hospital. It was touch and go for a while. As the police began to process the scene, taking statements and collecting evidence, Lucas found himself looking around the lab with new eyes. This place that had been his sanctuary, his world of pure science and innovation, had now become a battleground in a war he was only beginning to understand. "Dad," Lucas said, turning to James, "I need to tell you something. Before all this happened, I had a breakthrough. I think I've solved the problem we've been struggling with." James's eyes widened. "You're sure?" Lucas nodded, patting his bag where his laptop and notes were safely stored. "I'm sure. We can make this work, Dad. We can change everything." For a moment, the tension and fear of the night melted away, replaced by a shared look of excitement and hope between father and son. But the moment was short-lived as a detective approached, asking for their formal statements. As they left the lab, escorted by police officers, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they had just crossed a point of no return. The stakes had been raised, the danger made all too real, but they had also gained something crucial: irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy against them. The New York City night stretched out before them, a tapestry of lights and shadows, and somewhere out there, their enemies were regrouping, planning their next move. But for now, at least, Lucas, James, and Sophia were together, united in their determination to see this through to the end. As they climbed into a waiting police car, Lucas caught his reflection in the window. The young man staring back at him looked older somehow, hardened by the events of the night, but there was also a fire in his eyes, a determination that hadn't been there before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles they would face, Lucas knew one thing for certain: they would face them together, as a family. And with the breakthrough he had made, they now had a real chance of not just winning this fight, but of changing the world in the process. The car pulled away from the curb, carrying them into an uncertain future. But as Lucas felt the comforting presence of his parents beside him, he allowed himself a small smile. They had survived the night, and tomorrow they would begin the fight anew. The gathering storm was upon them, but they were ready to weather it together. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the thick clouds hanging over New York City as Lucas, James, and Sophia sat in a nondescript safe house provided by the FBI. The events of the previous night had set in motion a chain of reactions that had thrust them into the center of a federal investigation. The small living room was cluttered with laptops, files, and half-empty coffee cups, evidence of their sleepless night spent debriefing agents and piecing together the extent of the conspiracy against them. Lucas sat on the worn couch, his laptop balanced precariously on his knees as he worked to recreate the breakthrough he had made in the lab. The adrenaline of the night before had worn off, leaving him exhausted but determined. Every few minutes, he would glance up at his parents, still marveling at the way they had come together in the face of this crisis. James paced the room, his phone pressed to his ear as he dealt with the fallout at Carter Enterprises. The attempted break-in had made the morning news, and the company's stock was already taking a hit. "No, we can't issue a statement yet," he said, his voice tense. "Just keep everything running as normally as possible. I'll be in touch." Sophia sat at the small dining table, surrounded by legal documents and her own laptop. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she compiled all the evidence they had gathered, building a case that she hoped would be strong enough to bring down the entire conspiracy. As James ended his call and sank into an armchair, rubbing his temples, Lucas spoke up. "I've almost got it," he said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "In the calculations I made last night, I'm close to replicating them." James leaned forward, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "That's great news, son. Once we have that locked down, we'll have concrete proof of what our technology can do. It'll make it a lot harder for them to bury this." Sophia looked up from her work, a small smile on her face despite the dark circles under her eyes. "You too, and your science," she said fondly. "Don't forget, we need to make sure all of this is legally airtight. We can't give them any loopholes to slip through." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Everyone tensed, exchanging wary glances. An FBI agent stationed outside the safe house poked his head in. "Mr. Carter, there's someone here to see you. Says his name is Thomas." James stood quickly, his face a mix of relief and concern. "Let him in." Thomas entered the room, looking pale and haggard. His arm was in a sling, and a nasty bruise bloomed across one side of his face. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, his voice weak, "but I couldn't stay in the hospital. Not when there's so much at stake." Sophia rushed to help Thomas to a chair, her maternal instincts kicking in despite the complicated history between them. "You shouldn't be out of bed," she chided gently. "But I'm glad you're okay." As Thomas settled into the chair, Lucas couldn't help but study the man who had been at the center of the leak. He had known Thomas for months, had trusted him. The betrayal still stung, even though he understood the impossible position Thomas had been in. "I have more information," Thomas said, his eyes darting between James, Sophia, and Lucas. "When they realized I had turned on them, they let some things slip. Things I think you need to know." For the next hour, Thomas laid out everything he had learned about the conspiracy. The web of corruption and deceit was even more extensive than they had imagined, reaching into the highest levels of government and industry. As he spoke, Lucas felt a growing sense of dread. How could they possibly hope to fight against something so vast and powerful? But then he looked at his parents, at James's determined expression and Sophia's fierce concentration as she took notes, and he felt a surge of hope. They had come this far, against impossible odds. They could see this through. As Thomas finished his account, there was a moment of heavy silence in the room. It was James who finally broke it, his voice steady and resolute. "Thank you, Thomas. I know how much courage it took to come forward with this. We'll make sure you and your family are protected." Thomas nodded gratefully, then turned to Lucas. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I never wanted to betray you or the project. I hope someday you can forgive me." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. The anger and hurt he had felt towards Thomas melted away, replaced by compassion. "There's nothing to forgive," he said softly. "You were trying to protect your family. I understand that now more than ever." As Thomas left, escorted by FBI agents to another safe location, the Carter Mitchell family found themselves at a crossroads. They had the information they needed, but the path forward was fraught with danger. "We need to go public," Sophia said, her lawyer's mind already formulating strategies. "Get this information out to as many people as possible. Make it too big for them to cover up." James nodded in agreement. But we need to be smart about it. If we move too quickly, they could discredit us before we have a chance to present our case." Lucas, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly sat up straight. "I've got it," he said, his eyes wide with excitement. "The calculations, I've recreated them, and I think I've found a way to make the technology even more efficient than before." James and Sophia gathered around Lucas's laptop, their eyes widening as they took in the implications of what they were seeing. "This is incredible," James breathed. "With this, we could revolutionize the entire energy industry overnight." Sophia's legal mind was already racing ahead. "And it gives us leverage. If we can prove that this technology works, that it's as groundbreaking as we claim, it'll be much harder for them to dismiss our accusations as the ravings of disgruntled employees." As they began to formulate a plan, Lucas felt a strange mix of emotions wash over him. Fear of what lay ahead, excitement about the potential of his breakthrough, and a deep, abiding love for the two people who had come together to fight alongside him. For the first time in his life, he felt truly part of a family, not just by blood, but by choice and shared purpose. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Lucas worked tirelessly to refine his calculations and begin preliminary testing of the new technology. James used all of his business acumen and connections to secure allies in the industry, people who would stand with them when they went public. Sophia prepared their legal case, ensuring that every accusation was backed up by irrefutable evidence. Through it all, they remained in the safe house, cut off from the outside world, except for their FBI handlers. The isolation was difficult, but it also brought them closer together. In the quiet moments between strategy sessions and frantic work, they found time to talk, really talk, in a way they never had before. One evening, as they sat around the small dining table sharing a simple meal, James cleared his throat. "I owe you both an apology," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Lucas, I missed out on so much of your life because I was too focused on my own ambitions. And Sophia, I hurt you in a way that can never truly be made right." Sophia reached out, taking James's hand. "We can't change the past," she said softly, "but we're here now, together. That's what matters." Lucas nodded in agreement, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "I used to dream about what it would be like to have both of you in my life," he admitted. "I never imagined it would happen like this, but I'm grateful for all of it." As they sat there, hands clasped across the table, Lucas felt a sense of peace wash over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers they would face them as a family. The moment was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. An FBI agent entered, his face grave. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Mitchell, Lucas, we've received intelligence that suggests our location may have been compromised. We need to move you immediately." The peaceful atmosphere shattered, replaced by a flurry of activity as they rushed to gather their essential documents and equipment. As they were ushered out of the safe house and into waiting vehicles, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they were moving towards a final confrontation. The New York City night enveloped them as they sped through the streets, the familiar skyline a stark reminder of everything that was at stake. Lucas clutched his laptop to his chest, knowing that it contained the key to their future, both the breakthrough technology and the evidence that could bring down a corrupt empire. As they drove, James reached out, placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Whatever happens," he said, his voice steady, "I want you to know how proud I am of you, not just for your brilliance, but for your courage and your heart." Sophia, sitting on Lucas's other side, squeezed his hand. "We're in this together," she said firmly. "All of us." Lucas nodded, feeling a surge of determination. They were heading into the unknown, facing enemies more powerful than they could have imagined, but they had something their opponents didn't: the strength of a family united, the power of truth, and a technology that could change the world. As the city lights blurred past the car windows, Lucas allowed himself a small smile. The eye of the storm was passing, and they were about to plunge back into the tempest. But for the first time in his life, he felt truly ready to face whatever lay ahead. With his parents by his side and his breakthrough secure, Lucas knew that they had a real chance of not just surviving this ordeal, but of emerging victorious. The car turned onto a quiet street, heading towards a new safe house and an uncertain future. But as Lucas looked at the determined faces of his parents, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. They were the Carter-Mitchell family, and together they were unstoppable. The new safe house, a nondescript brownstone in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood, felt claustrophobic after days of confinement. Lucas paced the small living room, his mind racing with calculations and strategies. James sat at the dining table, his laptop open as he coordinated with their remaining allies at Carter Enterprises. Sophia was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low and urgent as she spoke with contacts in the Justice Department. The tension in the air was palpable, a constant reminder of the high stakes they were facing. Lucas paused by the window, peering out through a gap in the curtains at the street below. Everything looked normal, people walking dogs, kids playing on the sidewalk. but he couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked just out of sight. "DeLucas," James called, breaking through his son's reverie. "Come take a look at this." Lucas moved to his father's side, leaning over to see the computer screen. James had pulled up a news article, the headline blaring, "Carter Enterprises under investigation. Fraud and corporate espionage alleged." "They're trying to get ahead of the story," James said, his voice tight with anger. "And painting us as the criminals before we can go public with what we know." Sophia joined them, her call finished. "It's not just the media," she said grimly. "I've just heard from my contact at the DOJ. There's pressure coming from high up to shut down our case. They're claiming national security concerns." Lucas felt a surge of frustration. How can they do this? We have evidence. We have Thomas's testimony. How can they just sweep it all under the rug? James placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder, his touch comforting despite the gravity of the situation. "Money and power, son. It's amazing what people can get away with when they have both in abundance." Sophia's eyes narrowed, a determined glint in them that Lucas recognized from countless courtroom battles. "But we have something they don't," she said. "We have the truth, and we have Lucas's breakthrough. We just need to find a way to get it all out there, to make it too big for them to cover up." As if on cue, Lucas's phone buzzed with an incoming text. He glanced at it, his eyes widening. "It's from Emma," he said, referring to his best friend and fellow scientist. "She says she might have a way to help us." James and Sophia exchanged a concerned look. "Lucas, are you sure we can trust her?" James asked cautiously. We can't risk bringing anyone else into this who might be compromised." Lucas nodded emphatically. "I trust Emma with my life. She's been there for me through everything, and she knows almost as much about the project as I do. If she says she can help, I believe her." After a tense discussion, they agreed to hear Emma out. Lucas set up a secure video call, his heart racing as he waited for the connection to establish. When Emma's face appeared on the screen, he felt a rush of relief at seeing a friendly face after days of isolation. "Lucas!" Emma exclaimed, her eyes darting between him and his parents. "Thank God you're okay. I've been so worried." "We're hanging in there," Lucas replied, managing a small smile. "You said you might be able to help?" Emma nodded, her expression turning serious. "I think I might have a way to get your breakthrough and the evidence out to the public in a way that can't be ignored or covered up. But it's risky, and we'd have to move fast." As Emma outlined her plan, Lucas felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. It was audacious, potentially dangerous, but if it worked, "A live global broadcast," James said, his eyebrows raised. "From the UN Climate Summit, that's ambitious." Emma nodded. "I have a friend who works in IT for the summit. He can get us access to their systems. Let us hijack the broadcast for a few minutes. It would give you a platform to present your evidence and demonstrate the technology to the whole world at once." Sophia leaned forward, her legal mind already analyzing the potential ramifications. "It's not exactly legal," she mused. "Oh, but given the circumstances and the importance of what we're revealing, we might be able to justify it as whistleblowing." Lucas looked between his parents, seeing the wheels turning in their minds. "What do you think? Should we do it?" After a moment of tense silence, James nodded slowly. "It's a huge risk," he said, "but at this point, I think it's our best shot. If we can get the truth out there, all at once, to a global audience, it might be enough to force their hand." With the decision made, they sprang into action. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Lucas worked feverishly to prepare a concise, impactful presentation of his breakthrough technology. Sophia compiled their evidence into a clear, damning narrative of corporate corruption and environmental sabotage. James reached out to trusted allies, setting up a network of support to help spread the information once it was public. As the day of the summit approached, the tension in the safe house reached a fever pitch. They knew that this was likely their only chance. If they failed, if they were caught before they could broadcast their message, everything they had fought for would be lost. The morning of the summit dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions brewing inside the brownstone. As Lucas put the finishing touches on his presentation, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see both of his parents standing there, their faces a mix of pride and concern. "Whatever happens today," Sophia said softly, "know that we love you, and we're so proud of the man you've become." James nodded in agreement. "You're braver and stronger than I ever was at your age. No matter how this plays out, you've already accomplished something extraordinary." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. He stood, pulling both of his parents into a tight embrace. For a moment, they stood there, a family united in the face of overwhelming odds. The moment was broken by a knock at the door. Their FBI handlers had arrived to escort them to the summit. As they gathered their equipment and prepared to leave, Lucas took one last look around the safe house that had been their home and headquarters for the past week. He had a feeling that, one way or another, nothing would ever be the same after today. The ride to the UN building was tense, the New York City traffic seeming to crawl by at an agonizing pace. Lucas clutched his laptop to his chest, knowing that it contained not just his life's work, but potentially the key to changing the world's energy future. As they approached the UN, Lucas's phone buzzed with a message from Emma. "We're in position. Systems are go. Good luck." They made their way through security, their FBI escort smoothing the way. Lucas could feel his heart pounding as they entered the main conference hall. The room was packed with diplomats, scientists, and world leaders, all gathered to discuss the future of global climate policy. James and Sophia took their seats in the audience, while Lucas made his way backstage, ostensibly to prepare for a panel discussion later in the day. In reality, he was heading for the broadcast control room, where Emma's friend was waiting to give them access to the system. As Lucas waited in the wings, watching the current speaker droning on about emissions targets, he felt a moment of doubt. Were they really about to do this? Hijack a global broadcast, risk everything on one desperate gambit? But then he thought of everything they had been through, of the corruption and greed that threatened not just their work, but the very future of the planet. He thought of his parents, who had come together and fought so hard to give him this chance, and he knew that this was the right thing to do. At exactly 2:15 p.m., as planned, the main broadcast feed cut out. For a moment, there was confusion in the hall. Then Lucas's face appeared on the giant screens, his voice echoing through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I apologize for the interruption, but what I'm about to show you is too important to wait. My name is Lucas Mitchell, and I'm here to expose a global conspiracy that threatens not just the future of clean energy, but the very fate of our planet." As Lucas launched into his presentation, laying out the evidence of corruption and showcasing his breakthrough technology, he could see the shock and disbelief rippling through the audience. In the control room, Emma and her friend worked frantically to keep the broadcast going, fighting off attempts to cut the feed. James and Sophia watched from the audience, their hearts swelling with pride as their son stood tall in the face of overwhelming odds. They could see security personnel starting to move towards the stage, but it was too late. The truth was out there, broadcast to millions around the world. As Lucas concluded his presentation, the feed suddenly cut out. The main lights in the hall came up and chaos erupted. Journalists were on their feet, shouting questions. Diplomats huddled in urgent conversation. And through it all, Lucas stood on the stage, a beacon of truth in a storm of confusion and disbelief. As security personnel surrounded him, Lucas caught sight of his parents making their way towards the stage. James's face was set in a determined expression, while Sophia already had her phone out, no doubt calling in every legal favor she had. In that moment, as the world around him exploded into action, Lucas felt a sense of calm settle over him. They had done it. They had taken their shot, laid everything on the line for what they believed in. Whatever came next, arrests, trials, global energy revolutions, they would face it together as a family. The Carter-Mitchell family had started this journey fractured and alone. But now, standing united in the eye of the storm they had created, they were stronger than ever. And as Lucas was led off the stage, his parents falling into step beside him, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for them, but for the entire world. The world seemed to hold its breath in the days following Lucas's dramatic revelation at the UN Climate Summit. The Carter-Mitchell family found themselves at the center of a global storm. Their names and faces splashed across every news outlet and social media platform. The aftermath of their bold move was a whirlwind of legal battles, media scrutiny, and public debate that threatened to tear them apart even as it brought them closer together. Lucas sat in a small, windowless room in the FBI field office in New York City, his fingers drumming nervously on the metal table before him. It had been 3 days since the broadcast, and he had spent most of that time being questioned by various government agencies. The door opened, and Sophia walked in, her face showing the strain of sleepless nights and constant legal maneuvering. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" she asked, taking a seat next to him. Lucas managed a weak smile. "I'm okay, just tired." "How's Dad?" Sophia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "He's still in meetings with the SEC. They're going over every decision he's made at Carter Enterprises with a fine-tooth comb, but he's hanging in there." As they sat in companionable silence, both lost in thought, the door opened again. An FBI agent entered, followed by a stern-looking woman in a crisp suit. "Mr. Mitchell, Ms. Mitchell," the agent said. "This is Samantha Reeves from the Department of Justice. She'd like to speak with you." Lucas felt his heart rate quicken. This was it, the moment that would determine their fate. Would they be hailed as whistleblowers or condemned as criminals? Samantha took a seat across from them, her face unreadable. "I'll get straight to the point," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "The evidence you've presented is compelling. We've been conducting our own investigation, and it corroborates much of what you've claimed." Lucas and Sophia exchanged a look of cautious hope. Samantha continued, "However, the manner in which you chose to release this information has created some complications. Hijacking a UN broadcast isn't exactly standard whistleblowing procedure." Sophia leaned forward, her lawyer instincts kicking in. "Now, given the extent of the corruption we uncovered and the attempts to silence us, we felt we had no other choice. Surely, the importance of the information outweighs the unorthodox method of its release." Samantha's expression softened slightly. "That's the argument many are making. The public response has been overwhelming. People are demanding action, not just against the corporations involved, but in support of your clean energy technology." Lucas felt a glimmer of hope. "So what happens now?" "Now," Samantha said, "we negotiate. The DOJ is prepared to offer you a deal. In exchange for your full cooperation in our ongoing investigation, we're willing to grant you immunity from prosecution for the broadcast incident." As Sophia began to discuss the terms of the deal with Samantha, Lucas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They weren't out of the woods yet, but for the first time in days, he could see a path forward. Across town, in the imposing offices of Carter Enterprises, James Carter stood at the window, looking out over the New York skyline. The past few days had aged him, lines of worry etched deep into his face. But there was also a fire in his eyes, a determination that hadn't been there before. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Thomas entered, looking haggard but resolute. "The board meeting is about to start, sir. Are you ready?" James nodded, straightening his tie. "As ready as I'll ever be. Let's go face the music." The boardroom was tense as James took his seat at the head of the table. The other board members watched him warily, a mix of anger, fear, and grudging respect in their eyes. "Gentlemen," James began, his voice steady, "I know the past few days have been tumultuous, but I stand by the actions of my son and our family. What we uncovered was too important to ignore, too dangerous to keep hidden." One of the older board members, a man named Harrison spoke up. "James, you've put this company in an impossible position. Our stock is in freefall. We're facing multiple investigations, and our reputation is in tatters. How do you propose we move forward from this?" James leaned forward, his eyes blazing with the same passion he'd seen in Lucas during the broadcast. "We move forward by embracing the truth, by acknowledging our past mistakes, and committing ourselves fully to the clean energy future that Lucas has made possible." He stood, pacing the room as he spoke. "Gentlemen, we have a choice. We can try to weather this storm by denying and deflecting, or we can seize this opportunity to remake Carter Enterprises into a leader in sustainable technology. I know which path I intend to take. The question is, are you with me?" As James laid out his vision for the company's future, he could see the mood in the room begin to shift. The anger and fear were still there, but now there was also a spark of excitement, a glimmer of hope for what they could achieve. By the time the meeting ended, James had secured the board's tentative support for his plan. It wouldn't be easy. They would face intense scrutiny and numerous challenges in the months ahead, but they had a chance to turn this crisis into an opportunity. As James left the boardroom, his phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. "Deal with DOJ in place. Lucas is free to go. Meet us at home." James felt a surge of relief and love. After everything they had been through, they were still standing, still fighting. He quickly replied, "On my way. Tell Lucas I'm proud of him, of both of you." Across the city, in a small cafe near the FBI office, Lucas and Sophia sat nursing cups of coffee, the adrenaline of the past few days finally wearing off. "So, what happens now?" Lucas asked, his voice tinged with equal parts excitement and trepidation. Sophia reached out, squeezing his hand. "Now, we keep fighting. The DOJ deal gives us some breathing room, but there's still a lot of work to do. We need to make sure your technology gets the support and recognition it deserves." Lucas nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "I've been thinking about that. What if we set up an independent foundation? Something separate from Carter Enterprises, dedicated to developing and implementing clean energy solutions worldwide." Sophia's eyes lit up. "That's a brilliant idea, sweetheart. It would allow us to work outside the corporate structure, partner with governments and NGOs." As they began to flesh out the idea, Lucas felt a renewed sense of purpose. The past few months had been a roller coaster of emotions and challenges, but they had also shown him what he was capable of, not just as a scientist, but as a person willing to stand up for what he believed in. The cafe door opened, and James walked in. For a moment, he just stood there, taking in the sight of his son and the woman he had loved and lost so many years ago. Then, with a few quick strides, he joined them at the table, pulling them both into a tight embrace. "We did it," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Against all odds, we actually did it." As they sat there, a family reunited and strengthened by adversity, the cafe TV caught Lucas's attention. A news anchor was discussing the global reaction to their revelation. The fallout from the Carter-Mitchell disclosure continues to reverberate around the world. Protests have erupted in major cities, demanding action on climate change and corporate accountability. Meanwhile, several countries have already expressed interest in implementing the breakthrough clean energy technology revealed during the broadcast. Lucas felt a mix of pride and humility wash over him. What had started as a personal quest to prove himself had turned into something much bigger, something that had the potential to change the world. James noticed Lucas's distraction and followed his gaze to the TV. "Quite something, isn't it?" he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "To see the impact we've had." Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's just the beginning, though. We've opened the floodgates, but now comes the hard part, making sure this momentum leads to real, lasting change." As they continued to talk, making plans and imagining the future, Lucas couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. Just a few months ago, he had been a young scientist with a dream, working alone in his lab. Now he was part of something bigger, a family, a movement, a potential revolution in how the world viewed and used energy. The challenges ahead were daunting. They would face opposition from entrenched interests, skepticism from those who feared change, and the sheer complexity of implementing a new energy paradigm on a global scale. But as Lucas looked at his parents, saw the determination in their eyes, and felt the strength of their support, he knew that they could face anything together. As the sun began to set over New York City, casting a golden glow through the cafe windows, the Carter Mitchell family raised their coffee cups in a quiet toast. "To the future," James said. "To the truth," Sophia added. "To family," Lucas finished. Their cups clinked together, a small sound that seemed to echo with the promise of bigger things to come. The world outside was changing, in part because of their actions. But in that moment, in the warm glow of the cafe and the love of his family, Lucas knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The journey that had begun with a young man's quest for recognition had transformed into something far greater, a family reunited, a world on the brink of change, and a future bright with possibility. As they left the cafe and stepped out into the New York evening, Lucas, James, and Sophia walked arm in arm, ready to face whatever came next as a united front. The city stretched out before them, a tapestry of lights and possibilities. And somewhere in that urban jungle, the future they had fought so hard for was waiting to be built, one step at a time. The early morning sun cast a golden glow over New York City as Lucas Mitchell stood at the podium, his heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. It had been 6 months since the dramatic revelation at the UN Climate Summit, and the world had changed in ways he could never have imagined. The grand opening of the Carter Mitchell Clean Energy Foundation headquarters was a testament to how far they had come. The sleek, solar-powered building stood as a beacon of hope and innovation in the heart of Manhattan, its very structure a showcase for the technologies they were working to implement worldwide. As Lucas looked out over the sea of faces, journalists, politicians, scientists, and supporters from around the globe, he caught sight of his parents in the front row. James and Sophia sat side by side, their hands clasped together, pride shining in their eyes. The sight gave Lucas the courage he needed to begin his speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and clear, "6 months ago, we stood before the world and made a promise to fight for a cleaner, more sustainable future, a promise to challenge the status quo and push the boundaries of what's possible in clean energy technology. Today, as we open the doors of this foundation, we reaffirm that promise and take the next step on our journey towards a brighter tomorrow." As Lucas continued his speech, outlining the foundation's goals and the progress they had already made, he couldn't help but reflect on the whirlwind of events that had led to this moment. The months following their revelation had been challenging, to say the least. They had faced legal battles, smear campaigns, and attempts to discredit their work. But they had also found allies in unexpected places, environmental groups, forward-thinking politicians, and even some former rivals who recognized the potential of their technology. James had undergone a transformation of his own. After stepping down as CEO of Carter Enterprises to focus on the foundation, he had thrown himself into the work with a passion that surprised even those who knew him best. His business acumen and connections proved invaluable as they navigated the complex world of international energy policy and corporate partnerships. Sophia had become the foundation's legal backbone, working tirelessly to protect their intellectual property and ensure that their technology would be used for the benefit of all, not just those who could afford it. Her expertise in environmental law and her unwavering commitment to justice had already led to groundbreaking legal frameworks for the implementation of clean energy solutions in developing nations. As for Lucas, he had found himself thrust into a role he never expected, not just a scientist, but a public figure, a symbol of innovation and hope for a new generation. It was a responsibility that weighed heavily on him at times, but one that he embraced with the same determination that had driven him throughout his life. But this foundation is about more than just technology, Lucas continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. It's about people. It's about creating a future where clean, sustainable energy is not a luxury, but a fundamental right for every person on this planet. He gestured to the diverse group of young scientists and engineers seated near the front. That's why we've established the Next Generation Initiative to nurture and support the brilliant minds who will carry this work forward. Because the challenges we face are too great and the opportunities too vast for any one person or organization to tackle alone. As Lucas spoke about the initiative, he thought about Emma, his best friend who had risked everything to help them get their message out. She now led the Foundation's research division, her brilliant mind and innovative spirit driving them to new breakthroughs almost daily. He thought about Thomas, who had found redemption through his work with the Foundation's cybersecurity team, using his skills to protect their research from those who would seek to exploit or suppress it. And he thought about the countless others who had joined their cause, activists, researchers, community leaders from around the world, all united in their vision for a cleaner, more equitable future. We stand at a crossroads, Lucas said, his voice resonating through the hall. The path ahead will not be easy. We will face opposition, skepticism, and the inertia of systems long entrenched. But we also have an unprecedented opportunity to reimagine our relationship with energy, with our planet, and with each other. As he spoke, Lucas could see the emotion on the faces of those gathered. There was hope, determination, and a palpable sense of being part of something greater than themselves. The technology we've developed is just the beginning, he continued. It's a tool, a powerful one, but a tool nonetheless. The real change will come from how we choose to use it, from the choices we make as individuals, as communities, as nations. Lucas paused, looking out over the crowd. He saw journalists scribbling furiously, cameras flashing, and social media feeds lighting up with real-time reactions to his words. But more importantly, he saw people listening, really listening, their faces alight with the possibility of what could be. That's why we're not just opening a building today, Lucas said, his voice swelling with passion. We're opening a door to a future where clean energy is abundant and accessible to all. A future where our children and grandchildren can breathe clean air, drink clean water, and look up at clear skies. A future where we live in harmony with our planet, not in conflict with it. As he neared the end of his speech, Lucas felt a surge of emotion. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, the long nights in the lab, the fears and doubts, the moments of triumph and despair. He thought about the family he had rediscovered, the bonds that had been tested and strengthened through adversity. But we can't do it alone, he said, his voice softening. This foundation, this building, this technology, they're all just the beginning. The real work starts with each and every one of us. It starts with the choices we make every day, the voices we raise, the future we choose to build together. Lucas looked directly at his parents as he delivered his final words. So I stand here today not just as a scientist, not just as the face of a foundation, but as a son, a friend, a citizen of this planet we all call home. And I invite all of you to join us on this journey. Because the future is not something that happens to us. It's something we create together, one choice, one innovation, one day at a time. As Lucas finished speaking, the hall erupted in applause. He stepped back from the podium, feeling a mix of relief and exhilaration. As he made his way off the stage, he was engulfed in a hug by his parents. "We are so proud of you, sweetheart," Sophia whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. James clasped Lucas's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done something amazing here, son, something that will change the world." As they stood there, a family united in purpose and love, Lucas felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but they would face it together, stronger for the trials they had endured. The rest of the day passed in a blur of interviews, tours, and conversations with supporters and potential partners. As evening fell, Lucas found himself on the rooftop garden of the new building, looking out over the city he called home. Emma joined him, handing him a glass of champagne. "Quite a view, isn't it?" she said, her voice filled with wonder. Lucas nodded, taking in the sprawling cityscape before them. "It's amazing. And to think, in a few years, a lot of those lights could be powered by our technology." Emma bumped his shoulder playfully. "Look at you, Mr. Visionary. Remember when we were just two nerds in a college lab, dreaming about changing the world?" Lucas laughed, feeling a wave of gratitude for his friend's unwavering support. "Seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it?" As they stood there, watching the city lights twinkle like stars, Lucas felt a profound sense of possibility. The future stretched out before them, full of challenges, but also brimming with potential. The door to the rooftop opened, and James and Sophia joined them. For a moment, the four of them stood in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them to this point. It was Sophia who finally spoke, raising her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," she said softly. "To family," James added, his arm around Sophia's waist. "To friendship," Emma chimed in, grinning at Lucas. Lucas looked at the three people who meant the most to him in the world, feeling a swell of love and gratitude. "To the future," he said, his voice filled with hope and determination. As their glasses clinked together, Lucas knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They had already overcome so much: betrayal, separation, corporate espionage, and global conspiracies. But through it all, they had found each other, had rediscovered the strength that comes from family, friendship, and shared purpose. The New York City night stretched out before them, a canvas of endless possibilities. And as Lucas stood there, surrounded by the people he loved, he felt ready for whatever the future might bring. The journey that had begun with a young man's quest for recognition had transformed into something far greater, a mission to change the world, one innovation at a time. As they turned to head back inside, ready to face the next chapter of their adventure, Lucas took one last look at the city below. Somewhere out there, the future they had fought so hard for was waiting to be built, and they were ready to lead the way together. The door closed behind them, but the story was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning. The Carter Mitchell family, once fractured and lost, had found their way back to each other. And in doing so, they had set in motion a chain of events that would ripple out across the world, changing lives and shaping the future in ways they could only begin to imagine. As the lights of the Carter Mitchell Clean Energy Foundation building shone out over the city, a beacon of hope and innovation, the stage was set for the next great adventure. The world was changing, and they were at the forefront of that change, ready to face whatever challenges and triumphs lay ahead, united in love, purpose, and the unshakable belief that together they could make a difference. The end of this chapter was just the beginning of a new and exciting journey, not just for the Carter Mitchell family, but for the world they were working to change. And as the New York night embraced them, the future had never looked brighter. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.